Cole sprang up in the middle of dinner, hurling a glass of wine at the wall just inches from my daughter's face, then shoved Rachel down into her chair and slapped her over and over right in front of me. Before I could react, his mother, Veronica, slowly clapped her hands as if applauding a brilliant performance and said coldly, "My son finally knows how to teach his wife." In that moment, my blood froze. But while they thought I was in shock, I quietly switched on the recording mode inside my coat pocket. And they had no idea. Tonight wouldn't just end Rachel's marriage. It would unearth a family secret buried for 12 years and pull all of us into a war no one could have predicted. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I don't even remember how I got up from that heavy wooden chair. Everything in the dining room seemed to spin. The soft yellow ceiling lights, the expensive curtains, the smell of roasted meat and wine, all of it blended into a suffocating haze that forced me to take a deep breath just to keep from collapsing. I had seen plenty of violence in my years as an attorney, but never, not once, did I imagine witnessing my own daughter being slapped by her husband right before my eyes. And even less could I imagine an older woman like Veronica, a mother, a widow, clapping her hands in approval. Rachel was still dazed, her eyes red, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her hair was a tangled mess from being yanked. I could hear her shallow, shaky breaths, as if one more gasp would break her body entirely. I forced myself to stay calm. If I spiraled, they would win. If I let emotion lead, I would miss the details I needed. I had coached countless clients through their worst moments, and now that same advice returned to save me. Slowly, clearly, I said, "Rachel, stand up, we're leaving." Cole laughed as if I had told a dull joke. Veronica tilted her head, a sick delight gleaming in her eyes. "You think you can take her that easily?" she asked, voice dripping with challenge. I didn't answer. I simply placed my hand on Rachel's shoulder and pried Cole's fingers off. He didn't resist. Perhaps he thought I was just a 62-year-old woman not worth his energy. But he would learn, very soon, that he had laid a hand on the only child of a mother who would burn the whole world down if necessary. I guided Rachel out of that massive house, the same place I had once believed would be her safe haven. I remembered Veronica's words at the wedding. Our family always welcomes her. Looking back, it sounded more like a warning than a promise. As we stepped outside, Rachel leaned on me like a woman drained after battle. The cold air bit at our faces, our breath turning into white mist. I helped her into the car, shut the door gently, then hurried around to the driver's side. The moment the door closed, Rachel collapsed into sobs like a child. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to see that." Her voice was fractured, trembling as if every word caused physical pain. I cupped her face and whispered, "No, Rachel, you did nothing wrong. No woman is ever at fault for being hit." She clung to me, her tears soaking into my thick winter coat. I let her cry, let the fear she'd bottled up for so long finally spill out. But I knew comfort wasn't enough. I needed to get her away. Fast. We'd only driven a few minutes when Rachel gasped and spoke through broken breaths. "Mom, this wasn't the first time." I slammed on the brakes so hard the car nearly skidded on the frozen road. I turned to her, my heart seizing. "Cole has done this before? For how long?" She lowered her head. 3 years. Since the first year we got married. It took me several seconds to absorb that number. 3 years. 3 years she lived in fear, controlled, belittled, beaten, while pretending everything was fine. I felt rage shake my fingertips, but I didn't let myself explode. Not yet. I inhaled deeply, pulled the car over, and grabbed my phone. Yes, this is Linda Harrington. I need to report domestic violence. The victim is my daughter. My voice was steady, unshaken. When the police arrived, Veronica was already on the porch as if performing her daily script. I heard her tell an officer, "Rachel has mental issues. She's sensitive. She knocked over the glass herself and fell." I stood less than 7 feet away, stunned by how effortlessly she lied. Cole loomed behind her, feigning drunkenness, though I knew he was sober. An officer tried speaking to Rachel, but she was trembling too hard to answer. I stepped forward and handed him my phone. "Officer, I have evidence." Veronica shot me a razor-sharp look. She hissed, just loud enough for me to hear, "You're making a very big mistake, Linda." But I said only, "We'll see who's mistaken." Lieutenant Parker, someone I knew from past cases before I retired, listened intently to the recording. His face tightened at Veronica's "teach his wife" comment, then shifted toward Rachel's bruised cheek. He didn't say much. He just documented everything and instructed me to keep Rachel safe. "Linda, this case won't be easy," he murmured. "The Matthews family has influence, but hold on to every piece of evidence. I'll be in touch." I nodded. As the police left, Veronica gave me one last chilling stare. "You have no idea what my family can do." I didn't respond. I just held Rachel's hand and led her to the car. But inside, I knew. She wasn't lying. The Matthews family would strike back, and they wouldn't be gentle. That night, after Rachel fell asleep in her old high school bedroom, I sat alone in the kitchen. My small home in Columbus, Ohio, had never felt so silent. The clock ticked, and I stared at a pot of boiling water, forgetting to turn off the stove. I glanced at Rachel's sleeping face, still swollen and bruised. The sight hurt so deeply it felt physical. Quietly, I whispered, "I will tear that family apart if I have to." I knew I had entered a lopsided war, a single mother against a wealthy, powerful family with a dark past, but I also knew I had no way back. When I replayed the recording, I heard the line Veronica muttered, thinking I was far enough not to hear. "Just like I did with my husband back then." A chill ran down my spine. I realized I had stumbled onto something far bigger than domestic violence, something that could destroy the entire Matthews empire. And more importantly, this door, once opened, could never be shut again. I sat in that kitchen for nearly an hour after the recording ended, my hands still trembling. Her words rang in my ears like cold metal scraping. Just like I did with my husband back then. Abusers sometimes speak nonsense in anger, but Veronica, she wasn't the type to say anything without calculation. She measured every glance, every breath, which made those words heavier, denser, and far more dangerous. The next morning, when Rachel walked downstairs, I saw the change immediately, in her posture, in her eyes. She no longer looked like a woman pretending to be strong. She looked hollow, like someone who survived the storm but wasn't sure she'd survive the sunrise. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. I pulled out a chair and placed a cup of tea before her, softening my voice. "Rachel, you need to tell me everything. All of it." She stayed quiet for a long time. Not until the steam from her tea rose and her eyes brimmed with tears did she finally speak. "Veronica." "She was always there, Mom. Always." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "During the first week after the wedding, she gave Cole a plan, a marriage plan. You heard me right. It had a timeline for having kids, how to manage finances, who got to make decisions. Cole treated it like scripture. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling shakily. She asked me to send her my pay stub every month so she could help us manage things. When I refused, she said I was disrespecting their family. Heat flooded my face. Veronica wasn't just controlling, she was a seasoned manipulator. Rachel continued, her voice flat as if she had rehearsed these thoughts 100 times alone. Cole started telling me to drop friends, said they were bad influences. Then he criticized my job at the lab, said it had no future. I believed him. I thought he wanted what was best for me. That was when I knew. Rachel had been eroded mentally, little by little. Abusers rarely start with violence. They start by shrinking their victim, piece by piece. I squeezed her hand. You are not to blame, not even a little. Rachel bit her lip, eyes wet. I knew what came next would be the hardest part, but truth was necessary. Once Rachel was steady enough, I went into my small office, opened my laptop, and created the first file. Case file. Rachel. Harrington Matthews. I hadn't practiced law formally in years, but my instincts were sharp as ever. I titled the document and began listing everything. Visible injuries, exact dates and times. Witness myself. Photos. I took pictures of every bruise, every swollen mark. Audio evidence. The original recording and one backup. My fingers flew across the keyboard, not sloppy, just fast. Every keystroke felt like a vow. Veronica Matthews would not erase this truth. As I was reviewing the timestamps, my phone rang. Veronica's name appeared. I let it ring a few seconds before picking up. I didn't want her thinking I was waiting. Linda, she began, her voice sugar-sweet enough to make my skin crawl. We're both adults. I believe we can resolve this. Gently. What do you want? I asked flatly. I want to protect your daughter, she said, stretching each word as if offering charity. Rachel isn't suitable for our family. She's weak, emotional, and Cole, he's simply stressed. If you insist on escalating this, we will have to reveal some unflattering things about Rachel. I let out a thin, humorless laugh. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening, she replied lightly, as if discussing living room decor. I'm warning you. Once my family acts, Rachel won't just lose her husband, she'll lose her job, her reputation, her chances at a normal life. I don't want that for her, but if you push me, I'll have no choice. My voice was calm, calmer than I expected. You might want to be careful, Veronica. I'm recording this call. Silence. Then she hung up. That silence was more terrifying than any threat. Later that afternoon, Lieutenant Parker called. Rachel needs to come in to give a statement. Without it, we can't move forward. Rachel stood beside me, hearing every word, her face drained of color. Mom, if work finds out, they'll judge me. The lab is downsizing. I can't lose my job. I held her shoulders gently. Don't worry about losing a job. Worry about keeping your life and taking your freedom back. But I knew that when a woman's spirit has been worn down for years, logic can't overpower fear. Rachel wasn't just afraid of Cole. She was afraid the world would turn its back on her the way Veronica had taught her from the start. No one will believe you. That invisible pressure kills confidence faster than any slap. That evening, after Rachel went upstairs to rest, I heard a car stop in front of the house. I opened the door and saw Veronica standing there in her expensive fur coat, her face calm as if she were visiting a neighbor. I warned you, Linda, she said bluntly. You're ruining that girl's life. My son just needs time. Rachel is fragile. She imagines things. I folded my arms. What do you want here?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My husband did not die of a heart condition." The word sliced through the air like a blade. I stood silent for several seconds, forcing myself not to react. Veronica gave a thin smile. He hurt himself with foolish decisions. Sometimes, women like us must protect our families at any cost, understand? "I didn't kill my husband," I said, "and I don't encourage anyone to do that." "Not everyone has the luxury of such morals, Linda," she replied. "My family survives because of difficult decisions." Then she left, the cold wind swirling behind her, as if the ground under my feet had cracked open. Rachel heard the last part of the conversation as she came down the stairs. She burst into tears, clinging to my shoulders. "Mom, I dragged you into all of this. I'm sorry." I placed my hand on her hair and stroked gently. "Don't apologize. I chose to stand with you, and I'm not backing down." But I knew I needed to prepare, truly prepare. That very night, I sent copies of the dinner recording, the phone call with Veronica, and my preliminary documents to an old colleague, Nora Campbell, now a federal prosecutor. I wrote only, "If anything happens to me, release all of this to the press." Nora replied immediately, "Understood. Stay safe." When Rachel fell asleep again, I opened my laptop and began researching the Matthews name. I didn't know what I was looking for, but my instincts told me this wasn't just about domestic violence, and I was right. Page after page, document after document, murky charity networks, unusually large political donations, missing pages from Thomas Matthews's medical file 12 years ago. The more I read, the more I felt as though someone was standing right behind me. The darkness around this story wasn't just thick, it moved, and I understood. We weren't just fighting a controlling family. We were touching a deep pit that people had tried to bury for more than a decade. I stared at my laptop until my eyes burned, unable to look away. The documents I unearthed about the Matthews family chilled me, even though the kitchen still held the warmth of the earlier tea. Everything I had suspected about Veronica, her cruelty, her control, her coldness, was only the surface. What I was seeing now went far beyond anything I had braced myself for. The name Matthew Matthews, Veronica's late husband, appeared in the death records like a shadow no one had mentioned in years. A familiar face from old community work more than a decade ago, then suddenly gone. I remembered seeing his picture at Cole's house. A gentle middle-aged man with a strained smile, like someone trying to hide relentless exhaustion. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now... I opened the forensic report. The first line made me press a hand over my mouth to keep my breath from escaping. Multiple contusions inconsistent with accidental fall. Multiple bruises not consistent with a bathroom slip. Not one, not two. More than 8 bruises, in places no simple fall could cause, on his back, his arms, his lower abdomen, half-moon shapes like someone's knuckles had left the marks. None of this appeared in the report Veronica presented at the funeral. I swallowed hard. The next lines were like a knife cutting through the silence. Possible signs of struggle, signs of resistance. I closed my eyes for a second, then forced them open. I needed to stay sharp for Rachel. A handwritten note from the responding officer was attached. One line made my skin crawl. Neighbor reports loud argument night before death. Woman shouting, thuds. A major fight, followed by a death-ruled accidental bathroom fall. And the person who benefited most financially was Veronica. I read on. Widow requested immediate cremation, refused second examination. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying not to tremble. Pieces were falling into place in a terrifying pattern. She controlled her family, controlled her son, controlled her husband's estate, and now she wanted to control Rachel's future, if I allowed it. I remembered the way Cole stiffened every time Veronica entered the room. His body went rigid, lips pressed tight, like a child caught doing wrong. Grown men don't fear their mothers like that, unless that control had been carved into their bones. Maybe that was why Cole believed controlling Rachel was normal. He was raised inside a cage, and men raised in cages rarely learn how to love. But understanding does not mean forgiving. I closed the laptop, stood, and gathered the entire stack of documents. I knew exactly what I had to do. Lieutenant Parker opened the door when I knocked. His face was tired, lined with years of long cases, but his eyes were still sharp, the eyes of a man who lived by principle and didn't bow to power. "I expected you to call in the morning," he said, letting me in. I couldn't wait. I placed the documents on his desk. "You need to see this right now." He read carefully, page by page. His jaw tightened. When he reached the neighbor's statement, he set the papers down and looked up. "Linda, do you know what you're stepping into?" "I do." "The Matthews family. They're not easy to take on. And Veronica is not just a controlling mother. She may be a killer." He was silent for several seconds, then said, "I'll open an independent investigation. We'll need witnesses, forensic review, and I'll find a way," I interrupted. "Just don't let them bury this." He nodded. "I promise." That promise meant more to me than anything. When I got home, Rachel sat at the dining table, her hands holding her head. The warm light softened her face, making her look younger, more fragile. She looked up. "Mom, where did you go? I was scared." I sat beside her and held her hand tightly. "Rachel, I need you to be strong. This goes deeper than we thought." She blinked, trying to read my expression. "Did you find something?" I told her everything, every word like shards of glass slicing the air. When I reached the part about signs of struggle, Rachel shivered as if someone had plunged her into ice water. No way. Mom, she couldn't have... She couldn't finish. I pulled her into my arms as her breathing grew unsteady. "Listen to me," I whispered, stroking her back. "We cannot be afraid. The truth is the only thing that will get you out of that family." But Rachel shook her head repeatedly, panicked. "Mom, if she killed her husband, she could kill us. She has power, money, people protecting her." I held her shoulders firmly, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Remember last night? You almost died under Cole's hands. If we back down now, you'll never escape. I would rather die than see you go back into that house." She broke down, sobbing into my shoulder. I slept only a few hours before dawn broke. As I was preparing tea, I heard a car stop outside. My heart jumped. Veronica again? But no, this car was black, with no Matthews family plate. The mail carrier left a thin envelope. No sender. I opened it. Inside was a small black USB and a single note. "You need to hear this if you want to stay alive." My chest tightened. I didn't plug the USB into my main laptop. I used an old offline computer. The audio began to play, and I froze. The voice I recognized instantly. Veronica, calm, cold, not a tremor of guilt, as if she were describing a flower arrangement. "He deserved to die. Long ago, I only gave him a little push. Men sometimes need to be reminded who runs things." I covered my mouth to stifle my breath. Rachel had come halfway down the stairs, heard me, and approached. "Mom, what is it?" I didn't answer. I handed her the headphones, and when she heard, I only gave him a little push. Her knees buckled beneath her. Mom, she killed him. She really did. I caught her before she hit the floor. This is the evidence we needed, the only weapon strong enough to make her pay. But I knew, right then and there, we had crossed a line we could never return from. Veronica was no longer just an emotional abuser, no longer just the mother of a violent man. She was a killer. And killers will do anything to bury the truth. I stared at the USB, then at my trembling daughter. I understood that from this moment forward, the darkness the Matthews family had hidden for over a decade had fully risen, and we, two lone women, stood at the center of the storm. I gently stroked Rachel's shoulder as she sat on the floor, staring at the USB like it was a venomous snake. I knew she was trying to grasp how someone could say such things and still live a polished public life, attending charity events and smiling for cameras. But I understood. I had met people like her in my career, powerful individuals with two faces, one for the world and one for the unfortunate souls trapped with them. But Veronica was unlike anyone I had ever confronted. She felt like a thinking shadow, one that chose its moment to strike, and I knew she wouldn't sit still. Just 2 days after we received the USB, the counterattack began, swift, cold, and precise as a blade across the throat. That morning, as I was preparing breakfast, the doorbell rang. Rachel answered, and I heard a man's voice say, "Rachel Harrington, this is a summons. You are accused of providing false information in a domestic violence report." Rachel froze, her hands shaking so badly the paper nearly slipped from her fingers. I rushed over and took it from her. The words on the legal document seemed to dance before my eyes. False reporting, fabrication of domestic violence incident. I inhaled deeply, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "This is intimidation, Rachel. Don't panic." But her eyes were filled with panic. "Mom, they're saying I made it up. They want to turn me into a criminal." I pulled her into my arms. "I'm here. We'll handle this." But not even 2 hours later, the second wave of the storm hit. Rachel's phone rang. I stood beside her as she put the call on speaker. "Miss Harrington, this is Human Resources. Due to the current situation affecting the company's reputation, we regret to inform you that we must place you on temporary suspension, pending an internal review." Rachel's face went pale. "But I'm the victim. I didn't do anything wrong." "We understand, but the company must protect its image. Thank you for your understanding." The call ended. Rachel dropped the phone onto the table, covering her head with both hands as if trying to keep the world from collapsing. "I'm going to lose my job," she whispered. "No, you're not," I said, though my chest felt heavy as stone. "They're just playing dirty." I had never seen my daughter look as small as she did in that moment. The next day, while I was working in my small office, an old room in a 2-story building next to the city library, 3 men in suits walked in. "IRS, we're here for an immediate inspection." My heart sank. "Do you have a warrant?" They did, complete and legal. They tore apart everything, files, computers, even my personal cabinet. In 32 years of practicing law, I had never once been audited in such a brutal manner. They hauled out boxes filled with documents. I knew exactly where this came from. The IRS does not suddenly care about a small attorney like me. Rachel texted me, "Mom, are you okay?" They came to my workplace too. I replied, "I'm fine. Don't worry. This is Veronica's move." I typed it like a cold fact, but my hands were shaking so badly the letters warped. That night, I received an email from the Ohio Bar Association. Complaint received. Ms. Harrington is suspected of abusing her authority and improperly influencing a criminal investigation. I froze. Who filed the complaint? I didn't need to ask. Veronica had begun turning over every weapon she had. This was no longer a personal dispute. This was a war designed to destroy my career, my reputation, and my spirit. While I fought the silent attacks, Rachel faced something even crueler. Her friends, the ones who took wedding photos with her, attended every birthday, said they loved her like a sister, began pulling away. I heard a voicemail playing on Rachel's phone as I walked into the living room. "Rachel, I really don't understand what you're doing. Cole is a good man. You're ruining his career. We don't want to be dragged into this drama. Please don't contact us anymore." Rachel shut off the phone mid-message. "I don't have anyone left, Mom. They all believe him." I held her hand. "It's okay. You still have me." But I knew for someone young like Rachel, losing friends could hurt even more than losing a job. Veronica didn't stop there. Saturday morning, while I was taking Rachel for additional injury documentation, a post went viral online. A worthless gold digger used Cole to latch onto money and turned on him when it didn't work out. Failed at her job, so she fabricated abuse for a payout. The account posting it? Veronica Matthews, a woman in her 70s using social media like a sharpened weapon. Rachel cried right there in the car, "Mom, I'm done. I can't take this anymore." I cupped her cheek. "Rachel, this is exactly what they want, to break you so you give up." She had lost weight. Her eyes were sunken. Her hair was thinning from the stress. This wasn't just external pressure. It was a battle inside her own soul. And I understood then. The Matthews family didn't want to destroy her reputation. They wanted to destroy her belief in herself. The next day, I met with Lieutenant Parker at the station. He looked at me with a rare expression of sympathy. "Linda, I'll be honest," he said, handing me a cup of hot coffee. "The Matthews family has deep connections in this city. You're dealing with something bigger than you think." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not withdrawing the report." He nodded. "I'll support you as much as I can within the boundaries of my job, but you need to prepare for more hits. This is just the opening act." I understood. I'd been in the field long enough to know that when the powerful are cornered, they strike back, by any means, legal or not. When I got home, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not legal briefs this time, but an event journal, documenting every threat, every call, every detail Veronica tried to bury. In my profession, when you fear being railroaded, there's only one way to survive: record everything. I wrote until the clock struck 3 a.m. I wrote until my hands hurt, until I heard Rachel crying softly in her room. When I finally set down my pen, I knew this was only beginning. Veronica had only used her left hand. She still had an entire arsenal waiting. I turned off the lights and stood at the window overlooking the dark yard. A cold wind shook the branches. I felt as though someone was watching us from the shadows. I took a deep breath, clenched my fist, and whispered, "If they want a war, I'll show them what a mother can do when her child is pushed to the edge." 'Cause I knew the real battle had only just begun. I still remember clearly the morning I decided to dig deeper into the death of Mr. Matthew Matthews. While making coffee, I opened the documents I'd photographed from the county's public records, the ones Veronica surely assumed the world had forgotten. But when I enlarged the scanned pages, something made my pulse tighten. There was mention of an old will, but not a single line about a newer one. That was far too strange for a man with his level of wealth. I called the county records office and asked casually, For the Matthew Matthews case, where is the 2011 will file? The person on the other end paused so long I thought the line had dropped. Ma'am, no will was ever filed. I knew that couldn't be true. A wealthy man active in the community dying suddenly would absolutely have left a will, at least a draft. But the file was blank, no trace, no copy. There was only one explanation. The will had been deliberately removed, and I didn't need 3 guesses to know who benefited most. That afternoon, I drove to a place I had long avoided, Maplewood Lake, where Mr. Matthews supposedly slipped and fell before losing consciousness. I stood before the still water, reflecting the gray sky, trying to imagine a healthy, middle-aged man simply losing his footing on such a harmless stretch of rocks. Nothing about the setting suggested danger, only silence. I didn't know how long I stood there before a voice behind me said, "What are you looking for out here?" I turned. A man in his 50s wearing a ranger uniform leaned against the wooden railing near the water. "I'm just trying to understand what happened here years ago," I said honestly. He studied me, then exhaled. "I remember him. Matthew Matthews. I was first on site after the call came in." I steadied myself. "Did you see anything unusual?" He bent and snapped a dry twig in half. "The night before," he said slowly, "I saw him and Mrs. Matthews arguing loudly, right there by the rocks." He pointed to the east side of the lake, very heated. She kept standing in his space, like she was cornering him. My heartbeat quickened. "Did you report that to police at the time?" He shook his head, eyes slipping away. "No one asked, and honestly, I didn't want trouble with a rich family." His words sent chills through me. People didn't stay silent because they didn't know. They stayed silent because they were afraid. When I returned home, Rachel was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, her eyes more alert than they had been in days. I saw a faint spark in her, a flicker I feared she had lost. "What are you working on?" Rachel turned the screen toward me. "I'm gathering emails and messages from Cole. Some have threats, and some I never dared read twice." I squeezed her hand, proud as if she had risen from a deep abyss. "You're doing well," I whispered. Rachel shook her head. "Not just that. I found something. You need to see." She opened a new folder. Inside were dozens of video files from security cameras, but not ones from her house. Cole installed hidden cameras in the house. I never knew until today when I accessed his cloud account. He forgot to change the password. I froze. "Rachel, how long were you being watched?" She opened a file dated last year, then another from 3 years prior. "I don't know," she said in despair, "but it looks like years." I covered my mouth, not from shock, but from choking fury. "You weren't just a victim of physical abuse," I said, steadying my voice. "You were a victim of illegal surveillance. This is a federal crime." Rachel inhaled sharply, tears streaming but eyes no longer cast downward. "I want to fight, Mom." It was the first time she said the words herself, and her voice made me believe she wouldn't break. The next day, I brought everything to Lieutenant Parker: the old forensic report, the ranger's account, the anonymous letter, the USB, Cole's hidden cameras. After I finished presenting, he leaned back in his chair, hands clasped before his mouth. "Linda," he said gravely, "this is no longer a suspicion. This is a homicide case with clear signs of cover-up." I nodded. "I know. And I need you to understand, you're on the right path. But the closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes." I met his eyes steadily. "I accept that." Parker took a deep breath and turned on his recorder to formally begin assembling evidence. I knew at that moment everything had crossed into a threshold we could never return from. That night, while I was typing more entries into the event journal, a faint metallic sound echoed from the back door. Rachel was asleep. I walked quietly down the stairs. The porch light cast a dim orange glow across the kitchen tiles. The back door was ajar. My lungs tightened. "Hello," I called out, but no one answered. I turned on every light in the house, checking room by room, window by window. Nothing was missing. There were no signs of theft. Only a small piece of paper placed neatly on the kitchen counter. Only 3 words written in black marker: "Step back." I lost my breath for a few seconds. A coldness spread from the back of my neck down my spine, as if someone had placed a hand on my throat. But that fear didn't weaken me, it only made me angrier. The next morning, Rachel saw me installing an extra safety lock on the back door. "Did something happen, Mom?" I didn't lie. "They pried the door open last night, didn't take anything, just a warning." Rachel panicked and wrapped her arms around me. "Mom, we have to stop." I placed my hands on her cheeks. "Rachel, if I step back, who will save you? Who will stop them from doing this to someone else?" She froze, and in her eyes I saw fear and respect blending together. "Aren't you scared?" "Of course I'm scared," I said honestly, "but fear isn't a reason to give up." I called Parker and reported the incident. Just half an hour later, he arrived at my house with 2 other officers. After checking the signs of tampering, he said, "They want you to know they're watching you. This is classic pressure tactics." "I understand," I replied. "From now on," Parker said, "the 2 of you will have nighttime patrol surveillance, and I'll request special protective measures for you if the case moves forward." I didn't ask if. I asked, "When do we take the next step?" Parker looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Very soon, Linda. You're closer to the truth than anyone else has ever dared to get." I looked out the window. The sky had gone dark. The wind was strong, and the old oak tree in the yard leaned toward the house as if trying to warn us. I knew deep in my bones that Parker was right. The closer we got to the truth, the more desperate the Matthews family became. And desperate people, especially those with money and power, are the most dangerous of all. But I also knew this, as clearly as my own heartbeat. I wasn't fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting to save my daughter's soul, and for that reason, I would never step back. I have never forgotten the morning of the disciplinary hearing, a morning I knew the other side wanted to turn into a sentence hanging over my head to scare me into staying silent forever. The Ohio Bar Association headquarters always felt formal, but that day it felt larger, colder, full of watching eyes. I didn't tremble, but every muscle in my body felt stretched tight like a wire. When I walked into the wide room with long wooden benches and the counsel seated in front, I understood that even a small misstep could destroy my 32-year career. Rachel wanted to come with me, but I told her to stay home with Parker. I didn't want her to witness any more humiliation. I set my bag down and opened the notebook where I had recorded every incident, every threat, every shady move the Matthews family had made. I was prepared to defend myself to the end, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened when the back door of the room opened. An older man, tall and slender but slow in his steps, leaning on a dark wooden cane, walked in. Light from the window fell across his face, a face I felt I had seen before, half hidden in an old photograph. The man stopped in the center of the room, seemed to gather his breath, and spoke in a hoarse but firm voice. "I am Edward Matthews, brother of Matthew Matthews. I want to testify." The room went so silent I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The council members turned to look at one another, then at me, as though wondering if this was something I had orchestrated. But I was more shocked than anyone. The name Matthews, that family name, was the very thing Veronica had always guarded like an impenetrable fortress. Edward Matthews slowly took a seat in the back row, bowing his head slightly toward me in a small gesture of greeting. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his eyes were bright and sharp, like someone who had carried a truth for too long. The chairperson spoke. "Mr. Matthews, please tell us why you are here today." The old man lifted his head. "Because I must make things right. I have been silent for 12 years. My heart skipped a beat. He began speaking slowly, as if each sentence dragged a painful memory with it. My sister-in-law, Veronica. She was smart, sharp, but after she married Matthew, I saw her change. She controlled the family, controlled the money, and especially controlled Matthew. My brother tried to separate from her 3 times, but each time, Veronica found a way to pull him back. The council exchanged glances. I listened to every word like swallowing ice. "I saw injuries on Matthew," he continued. "He lied, said he fell, hit a door, slipped off a ladder. But I knew. I knew because I once saw her shove him into a wall when she thought no one was watching." The council member frowned. "You're saying Veronica was physically violent?" Edward nodded, gripping his cane. "Not just that. She manipulated him psychologically. She made him believe that leaving her meant losing everything, his son, his company, his reputation, and she really had the means to make that true." I clenched my hands slightly as I listened, not surprised, not startled, just hearing the confirmation of what my instincts had long whispered. The night Matthew died. Edward took a long breath, his gaze drifting far away, back to Maplewood Lake that night. "He called me an hour before. He said he had found a lawyer and was going to file for divorce. He wanted to protect Cole. He wanted out." I held my breath. When I arrived, Veronica was on the porch. She coldly told me to go home. The next morning, Matthew was dead. She said it was an accident. "Did you believe it was an accident?" the chairperson asked. "From the moment I saw the bruises on Matthew's wrist at the funeral home," Edward said, voice shaking, "I knew it wasn't." Another member asked, "Then why did you stay silent for 12 years? Edward bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. "Because Veronica threatened my family. She said if I opened my mouth, I would have nothing left in this world to hold on to. And when I looked into her eyes, I believed her." A painful weight rose in my chest, an elderly man carrying guilt, fear, and silence for more than a decade. Edward looked directly at me. "I sent you the USB. I recorded her conversation with someone she once hired as home help. I sent it to make amends. I knew she would do to your daughter what she did to my brother if you didn't act." A shiver ran through me. His appearance wasn't just a turning point, it was a testimony from someone who had run from the truth for far too long. The chairperson whispered to the council, then announced, "While these new details are verified, the disciplinary investigation against Ms. Harrington will be paused. We do not see evidence at this time that she abused her authority as alleged." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Not relief, just the ability to breathe again. When I opened them, Edward was watching me, his gray-brown eyes warm but sorrowful. I walked toward him. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice tight. "No one blames you." He shook his head. "Oh yes, I blame myself. But now I want to make things right. If you and that police officer can protect me, I'm willing to be an official witness." "I promise," I said, placing my hand on his wrist, feeling his bones fragile but strong. We will protect you." Edward pressed his lips together. Veronica won't sit still. I know. He studied me for a moment, then said as gently as a breeze, "But you're stronger than you think, Linda. That's why I came today." When I stepped out of the hearing room, the air outside felt clearer, as if the sky had finally opened after days of storm clouds. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the silence before the storm. I stood on the steps, watching cars move along the avenue, and felt that something fundamental had shifted. Not just that we had more evidence or a new witness, but that I was no longer alone. A man who had carried 12 years of guilt had chosen to step into the light, and I knew that from the moment Edward Matthews walked into that room, the fortified world Veronica had built had begun to crack. When I got into my car and called Parker, he let out a stunned sigh. "Linda, you just brought us the biggest missing piece. We have to protect him," I said. "I'll arrange it. But you need to be careful, too. Once Veronica feels cornered, she'll be more dangerous than ever." I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, tired but steady. I'm ready. As I drove home, the late afternoon sun cast a soft gold across the road, making everything seem gentler. But inside me, a slow-burning fire spread, not anger anymore, but hope. For the first time since this battle began, I felt a real chance. And that feeling scared me, because as Parker had said and as life had taught me, when the powerful sense they're losing everything, they never go down quietly. Veronica Matthews must have felt the shift, and she would strike back. I just didn't know how, but I was ready. I still remember the moment Parker called, his voice heavy as if weighed down by stones. I was making chamomile tea for Rachel when the phone buzzed on the table. When I saw his name on the screen, I knew immediately something had happened, and I was right, but never imagined the extent. "Linda, you need to stay calm," Parker said. I'm used to hearing that. I tried to steady my voice. "What happened?" He paused. "Cole Matthews just violated the restraining order. Badly." I set the cup down, my heart pounding. "What did he do?" Parker exhaled. "He broke into Rachel's old house, destroyed everything." The kitchen floor under my feet felt colder. "Rachel wasn't there, right?" "No, but you should prepare yourself for what he did." When we arrived at Rachel's old house, the police had already taped off the yard. I held her hand tightly as she walked in. I thought she had prepared herself, but no one could be prepared for the sight before us. The living room looked like a storm had torn through it. The sofa slashed open, wooden furniture smashed into pieces, family photos, pictures of Rachel as a child, pictures of the two of us on our first trip after my divorce, were thrown to the floor, glass shattered everywhere. The crystal glasses Cole once gave her for Christmas shattered. But the worst part wasn't the broken objects. It was the bedroom door. On it, painted in dark red like blood, were the words, "I will take back what's mine." Rachel staggered back as if someone had slapped her hard. I caught her before her legs gave out. "Cole used to be in this room every day," she whispered, "and now it looks like he wants to erase every trace of me." I held her close. "Sweetheart, nothing here belongs to you anymore. The things that truly belong to you, freedom, safety, and your future, are all ahead of you." She cried, but this time not the helpless sobbing of the past weeks. Tears fell, but her eyes were different, brighter. Something in her had broken, and something else had awakened. Parker came over and handed me his tablet. The neighbor's camera caught everything. He destroyed the house for nearly 3 hours straight. No mask, no attempt to hide. I watched each clip, every swing of his arm carving deeper into the truth. He wasn't just unstable, he had decayed. "Rachel," Parker said gently, "we've taken him into custody. He's in the holding facility now." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I want to see him," she said. I turned sharply. "No." But Parker looked at Rachel as if he understood something. Maybe that's exactly what she needs to end this. He was right. I had seen my daughter change. She was no longer the terrified woman from the months before. She needed to close this door herself, not with fear, but with her own voice. The city. Jail sat beside the old courthouse with cold concrete walls and pale neon lights. When Rachel stepped into the visitation room, I walked behind her, my hand resting lightly on her back. He was already sitting there, hands cuffed in front of him, his face tense, but his eyes still full of that arrogant confidence of a man who believed he was right. "Rachel," Cole said first, half relieved, half reproachful. "You came. I knew you would." "Not for the reason you think," Rachel replied, her voice small but solid as steel. I sat down next to my daughter but said nothing. This was her moment. Cole leaned forward, the cuffs clinking. "They're making all this up. Veronica is blowing things out of proportion. You know my mother, but I love you. You know that." Rachel looked at him for a long time, so calmly that it knocked the confidence out of Cole's eyes. "Cole, love never hurts," she said. He frowned. "What are you talking about? I did everything for you. I got angry because I love you. You've known that about me for years." Rachel shook her head. "No, you did it because you wanted control, because you thought I was your possession." Cole's face flushed red, his cuffed hands tightening. "I will get you back. I told you already. You belong to me." Rachel stood up, leaning down slightly so she could look him directly in the eyes. "That's why I came today. To tell you one thing." Cole held his breath. "I'm divorcing you." His whole body jerked. His eyes turned icy, like someone had thrown him into cold water. No, Rachel, you can't, you're not allowed." "I am allowed," Rachel said, soft but firm. "And I will." Cole slammed his hands on the table, the metal ringing sharply. "Rachel, that's not you. Someone is filling your head. I know you love me." "I used to think so," Rachel cut in. "But now I understand. Whatever that was, it wasn't love." There was a silence so heavy it felt like the air had hardened. Cole bent forward, breathing hard, like a man who had missed a step in the dark. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Rachel added. "Thank you for that. Because if you hadn't done all those terrible things, maybe I never would have seen myself clearly." I looked at my daughter, and I saw a new woman, someone who had walked out of ruins and stood on her own feet. Cole stared at us, his eyes red. He searched Rachel's face for something, hope, regret, a desire to come back, but there was nothing left for him. That was the last time they looked at each other as husband and wife. Rachel turned away first. I walked behind her, but before leaving, I looked at Cole one last time. He was hunched forward, his shoulders trembling, not from remorse, but from losing control. He no longer had any power over my daughter. When we stepped into the jail courtyard, the late afternoon sun slanted down, casting a warm golden band across Rachel's face. She tilted her head toward the sky, her eyes closing, as if for the first time in years she could breathe deeply, fully, without anyone choking the air out of her. "Mom," she said, "I feel like I just walked out of a locked room I'd been stuck in for too long." I held her hand and squeezed gently. "You didn't just walk out, Rachel. You closed the door on that darkness for good." She smiled. The first real smile since this all began. "I'm free," she whispered. I looked at her, my heart full of a deep gratitude I couldn't put into words. A chapter had closed, not just for Rachel, but for me too. Yet I knew one thing as clearly as I knew the red letters I once saw painted across my daughter's door. Rachel's freedom was only the beginning. The real fight was still coming. I always thought that when the day finally arrived, when the truth couldn't be buried anymore, I would feel relieved. But when I stepped into the courthouse for Cole's first hearing, what I felt wasn't victory. It was a fog, thick and cold, hanging over everything. The air felt tight, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Rachel sat beside me, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. But her face was calm, a calm only someone who has stared into the deepest dark and survived can possess. Cole was escorted in wearing an orange jumpsuit, nothing like the polished, confident man he once pretended to be. His posture was stiff, clumsy, like someone who wasn't used to no one opening doors for him anymore. When he saw Rachel, he froze. Just a moment, but enough for me to know he still didn't understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The judge called the court to order. The hearing began. The prosecutor played the neighbor's camera footage. Cole smashing windows, breaking furniture with a hammer, ripping apart the bed, tearing wedding photos, destroying gifts Rachel once gave him. 3 hours of chaos, 3 hours of hatred, 3 hours of the twisted love he always claimed justified everything. The whole courtroom went silent when the footage reached the part where Cole painted the red words, "I will take back what's mine." I saw Rachel shiver. I placed my hand over hers. "You don't belong to his darkness anymore," I whispered. When the defense attorney tried to argue temporary emotional instability, the prosecutor shut it down immediately. There was a history of abuse, threatening messages, evidence from the hidden cameras. And most importantly, Cole violated the restraining order just 3 days after it was issued. The judge struck the gavel. His voice was sharp and final. "Defendant Cole Matthews, the court sentences you to 5 years in prison and a permanent no-contact order with the victim." Cole shot up from his seat. "Rachel, say something. You know I did it because I love you." Rachel didn't turn back. She said only one sentence, quiet but cutting through. "The air like glass." That wasn't love. Those words split the room in two. Cole sank into his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was no arrogance left. Officers led him away. Veronica stood up, her eyes burning into me like she wanted to tear my skin apart. "You destroyed my family," she hissed. I didn't tremble. I didn't lash back. I simply said, "You did that long before I came." Her face flushed, but no one stood beside her. Not a single person. The hearing ended, but I knew it was only the first chapter of their collapse. 2 months later, early fall chilled the air in Ohio. The trees along the road to the courthouse had begun turning yellow, but nothing about the day felt gentle. I sat in the larger courtroom holding Rachel's hand, with Parker behind us and Edward Matthews, thinner but clearer-eyed, seated beside his assigned security officer. The trial of Veronica Matthews, the event the entire city had whispered about for weeks. When Veronica entered, she no longer had her usual sharp, icy beauty. Her face was heavily made up but couldn't hide her fatigue. Still, her eyes held their familiar pride that insisted everyone else in the room was beneath her. The prosecutor began recounting the circumstances of Matthew Matthews' death, forensic inconsistencies, multiple bruises, signs of struggle, a rushed cremation with no secondary examination. Highly unusual for a wealthy family. Then the USB audio played. Veronica's voice filled the courtroom, clear and chilling. He deserved to die. I only pushed him a little. People gasped. A few shook their heads. No one spoke. Veronica shot to her feet, screaming, "That's edited. I never said that. This is a setup." Her lawyer paled, trying to pull her back down. But what truly shattered her defense was Edward's testimony. When he stood, the room froze. He gripped his cane, walking to the stand with all the strength he had left. "I stayed silent for 12 years, he said, voice shaking but not weak. "But today, I'll tell the truth." He spoke of the injuries he saw on Matthew, the loud arguments neighbors had overheard, the time Veronica blocked him from entering the house with an expression that froze his blood. The phone call from Matthew the night before he died. "Ed, I want a divorce. I'm afraid of Veronica." The room felt like all the air had been sucked out. Even the judge's face tightened. It was as if a buried truth had finally surfaced. At the end of his testimony, Edward's voice cracked. "My brother didn't die from a fall. He died because he lived beside a woman who believed she had the right to decide whether he lived or died." Veronica burst into tears, not of grief, but rage. "You betrayed the family, coward." Edward looked right at her. "I only regret not saving him." The verdict came 2 days later. Veronica Matthews was convicted of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Sentence, 12 years in prison. She screamed as officers cuffed her. You ruined everything. I'll never forgive you." I looked at her calmly, not triumphant, not smug, just honest. "Veronica," I said quietly, "I didn't destroy your family. You did." In that moment, her face twisted with hatred, and something in her eyes went hollow, like someone who finally realized the empire she built from manipulation and violence had collapsed beneath her feet. As she was escorted away, she looked back at the emptying courtroom. No allies, no friends, no relatives. Even those who once respected her avoided her gaze. I felt not joy, not victory, just a deep sadness for a family ruined at its roots. Rachel took my arm. "Mom, why don't I feel lighter?" I looked at her and gave a small, sad smile. "Because this is a tragedy, sweetheart. No one wins when a family has been broken for so long." She rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, we stepped out of the courthouse under a sky that was truly blue. Not the false blue of denial, but the blue of a new chapter opening, even though behind us we had closed one of the darkest chapters of our lives. I once thought that after Veronica and Cole were sentenced, everything would brighten instantly, like sunlight after a storm. But life moves in quieter rhythms. Consequences and changes don't arrive all at once. They seep in slowly like water into soil. And sometimes the most painful part isn't the confrontation itself, but the days that follow, when people must live with the choices they've made. One late fall morning, while I was making breakfast, Rachel walked into the kitchen with an envelope in her hand. Her expression wasn't panicked or sad, just hesitant. "Mom," she said, placing the envelope on the table, "a letter from Cole." I looked at her but didn't open it. "Do you want to read it?" Rachel inhaled softly as if gathering all her courage. "I already read it. Last night." I waited. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped together but no longer trembling like before. "He apologized," Rachel said. "Cole wrote that he finally understood why everything happened. He said growing up in that kind of environment made him believe control was love, jealousy was protection, and violence was a solution. He admitted he never truly knew what healthy love looked like. She paused for a moment, then concluded, but he also wrote that if I forgave him, he could change. And She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes clear. I don't want to go back. I nodded. You don't have to forgive someone to be free. I know. I'm keeping the letter as a way to close the chapter, but I won't respond. I couldn't have been prouder of my daughter. News that Cole had written an apology reached Parker and even Edward. Everyone saw it as a good sign, not because they wanted Cole and Rachel back together, but because when a toxic man finally recognizes his own destruction, it usually means he no longer has the strength to hurt anyone else. But the consequences for the Matthews family didn't end with Cole and Veronica. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Parker. Linda, you need to hear this, he said. From Edward's testimony from the USB and from the financial documents the prosecutor had collected, the investigation expanded to other members of the Matthews family, those who had helped cover up Mr. Matthews' death or benefited from Veronica's wrongdoing. The cousin, a family member who secretly used company funds to hide assets. Another cousin who provided false testimony 12 years ago. One by one, they were called in for questioning. No one was arrested yet. But the shadow of truth had begun to fall over them. The Matthews empire did not collapse in a single day. It cracked, slowly and steadily, until everyone could see how rotten it truly was. But during that time, Rachel's life was healing like a lake settling after a storm. The day she received an email from an old friend, someone from the group who had once shunned her when the scandal broke, she simply read it silently, then handed it to me. Rachel, I'm sorry. I believed the wrong people. I joined in the cruel things said about you. I hope someday you'll allow me a chance to make it right. The next day, someone else messaged her, then 2 more. Then a group of friends invited her for coffee, not to check in with judgment, but with genuine sincerity. Rachel didn't immediately embrace them. She had grown. She now knew how to choose who deserved to walk beside her. The old house, the one Cole destroyed as if he wanted to erase Rachel's existence, was sold in just 6 days. Many friends asked why she didn't renovate it or stay to overcome the painful memories. Rachel only gave a sad smile. I don't want to live inside 4 walls that once trapped me. And I understood. Honestly, I didn't want her going back to a place that had eroded her freedom day by day. Rachel's new apartment was on the 4th floor of a bright building. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide window, spreading across the walls like a pale yellow cloth. I watched her arranging her belongings, the flower vase, the bookshelf, the green ceramic cups I had given her, and I realized, for the first time in a very long while, that her shoulders were no longer pulled tight in defense. My daughter was living, not merely surviving. And Veronica. The news of her stroke came to me on a weekend afternoon. Parker called, his voice low. She collapsed in her cell. A stroke. She survived, but half her body is paralyzed. I went silent. Rachel was making tea and turned toward me, worried. Mom, what's wrong? I sat down. Veronica had a stroke. Rachel said nothing. After a moment, she set the teapot on the table and exhaled softly. I'm not happy about it, she said, and I don't pity her either. She looked up, her eyes not hateful, just accepting. I just feel it's fair. Everything fell back into place in the end. I held her hand, and in that moment, I understood what I had always believed throughout my years as a lawyer. Cruelty destroys itself. We don't need to retaliate. We don't need to inflict more pain. The damage people like Veronica create usually circles back in ways no one predicts. In the days that followed, my home had more peace than ever. Morning bird song, Rachel reading in the armchair at night, sometimes resting her head on my shoulder like when she was little. We cooked together, tended the garden that had been neglected through months of exhaustion. No pounding on the door at midnight, no threats, no eyes watching from the dark, just quiet. A quiet I once believed I would never experience again. One afternoon, while Rachel was tending the balcony plants, she turned back to me and smiled. "Mom, we can breathe now." I nodded. I didn't say anything. Sometimes words cannot keep up with the feelings inside. Yes, we could finally breathe. Not because we had won, but because no fear was gripping our throats anymore. Life didn't become perfect, but it became right. And for me, that was enough. If there was a moment in my life that made me stop and take a deep, slow breath, it was the morning Rachel walked out the door wearing a pale blue blouse, her hair tied neatly back, holding the new bag she bought with her own salary. Her eyes were bright, truly bright, something I hadn't seen during the years she lived with Cole. The brightness of someone who had stepped out of a windowless room and realized the sky was wide. "I'll be okay, Mom," she said with a smile that wasn't forced. I nodded, standing on the porch, watching her descend the steps. No more darting glances, no more shrinking posture. Rachel was walking the way she used to as a child, soft but steady, as if the world beneath her feet finally had space for her. She had found a new job at a medical research center, where people greeted each other with smiles, where supervisors didn't need to shout to prove authority, and where Rachel first experienced something most people take for granted: respect. That evening when she came home, I asked, "How was it?" Rachel smiled, taking off her scarf, and said something that nearly brought me to tears. "I forgot what it feels like to be treated like a normal person, Mom." James Porter entered her life the way kindness often does, quietly, without drama, without the overwhelming intensity that makes people suspicious. He was a resident doctor in the same building Rachel worked in, a few years older, tall, broad-shouldered, gentle-faced, with a voice soft but steady. I met him for the first time at a small seminar when Rachel brought him over. "James, this is my Mom." He extended his hand, firm but not overbearing. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hawkins. Rachel talks about you all the time." I glanced at Rachel and saw her cheeks turn slightly pink, not the girlish kind of blush, but the quiet shyness of a grown woman learning to trust a new hand after being hurt for so long. Throughout the event, I observed James with the instinct of a mother who has witnessed the worst hidden behind a man's polite exterior. But James had none of the red flags I watched for. He didn't touch Rachel unless she invited it. He didn't answer questions on her behalf. He noticed when she was tired but never told her what to do. In short, he respected her boundaries. And that, to me, was as meaningful as any declaration of love. One late spring evening, Rachel came home looking conflicted. I saw it the moment she opened the door. "What happened, sweetheart?" She set her bag on the table, walked over, and sat beside me. "James proposed to me." I sat up straight. "And what did you say?" She bit her lip. "I told him I needed more time." I couldn't help but smile gently. "That's a grown-up answer." Rachel sighed and rested her head on my shoulder like she used to. "I love him, Mom, but I'm afraid of myself. I'm afraid I'm not fully healed, afraid the old shadows are still inside me, and I'll bring them into a new life without meaning to." I stroked her hair. "Rachel, Being grown doesn't mean having no wounds. It means knowing how to care for them when they return. You've already done that. You stood up, fought back, walked away when you needed to. You know your worth. You know your boundaries. That means you are healed, not because you forgot the past, but because you no longer let it decide your future. She squeezed my hand, and I felt it clearly. My daughter had truly stepped out of the darkness. One Sunday afternoon, while we were pulling weeds in the garden, Rachel suddenly said, "Mom, I want to tell my story." I froze. "You mean publicly?" Rachel nodded. "There are so many women still living in silence, Mom. I used to be one of them. I know what shame feels like, what fear feels like, what confusion feels like. I want them to know there's a way out. I want them to look at me and think, if she did it, maybe I can too." I looked at my daughter for a long time, the baby I once held when she was learning to walk, the woman I held when she shook after Cole's blows, the warrior who stood in front of her husband in a jail visitation room and said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Now she wanted to turn pain into light. I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll tell it," I said. "Together." James supported her completely. He listened to her plans without taking over, without inserting himself, without offering cliché lines like, "You're so strong." He simply asked, "What can I do to help you?" When Rachel told me that, she burst into tears, not from sadness, from being understood. There were afternoons when I watched Rachel and James tending the garden together or fixing a bookshelf. There were mornings when I heard Rachel laughing at something James said. That laughter, I once believed I would never hear again, and in those moments I realized the future doesn't arrive in loud, triumphant waves. It comes quietly through small things: safety, peace, respect, kindness. Rachel had found all of that, and I, finally, felt my own heart loosen. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rachel whispered, "Mom, I think I'm ready now." I knew exactly what she meant, and I smiled. "Then let the future lead the way." Rachel turned to me, her eyes shimmering the way they did when she was little. "Do you think I deserve happiness?" I took her hand. "You've deserved it for a long time, Rachel. You're only just beginning to believe it." That night, after Rachel and James left following dinner, I stood at the door watching them go, a peace settling in me so deep it surprised even myself. No more darkness hanging over this house. No more fear, no more threats, no more fighting alone. My daughter had been reborn, and somehow so had I. Our future wasn't a blazing, brilliant light, but a warm one, gentle enough to see the road ahead, steady enough to remind us every step was worthwhile. And for the first time in years, I believed we were not just surviving. We were truly living. I don't know what moment marked Rachel's clearest turning point. Was it when she bravely walked away from Cole? When she stood in front of the man who once paralyzed her with fear and said, "I want a divorce"? Or was it the calm moment she said she wanted to tell her story to help others? Maybe all of them. Or maybe it was that quiet morning when I opened the door to my study and found Rachel at her computer, shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady, as if she were finally doing something that belonged to her more than anything else ever had. "Mom," she looked up, her eyes naturally bright. "I think I'm going to start a blog." "A blog?" I asked, walking closer. Rachel nodded and turned the screen toward me. The website was empty, only one simple title at the top. "Finding Myself Again. Han Trin Tim Lai Chin Ming." I read each word slowly. No embellishment, no dramatics, just a gentle but weighty declaration from someone once broken who had now chosen to stand tall again. I want to tell the truth, Rachel said, her voice soft but steady, not to get revenge, but so that someone, just one person, might see the door I once couldn't see. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Then right, Rachel. You didn't just survive. You won. Her first post went up that evening. Within hours, the first comments appeared. Messages from strangers, mostly women, many using pseudonyms, some leaving only a heart, but enough to show me her story had not disappeared into the void. An email arrived after midnight from a woman in Michigan. I've never dared tell anyone that my husband controls my phone, my money, even my clothes. When I read your story, I saw myself. Thank you for speaking out. The next morning, 3 more emails, then 10, then 50. Rachel read each one, and every time she finished, she sat quietly for a moment, as if gathering the pain of others into her chest to understand, to share, to make sure none of it was overlooked. Watching her, I saw a woman whose personal suffering had become a fire, not to burn herself, but to warm others. As for me, I continued my work as before, but something fundamental shifted. My name began reaching women who saw me as a safe place. One young woman walked into my office on a Friday afternoon. "Mrs. Hawkins," she said, her hands clasped tightly, "I read your daughter's blog. I want to ask, do I have the right to leave?" Another called close to midnight. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I don't know who else to call." I'm no superhero. I don't have solutions for every kind of pain, but I know how to help them open the first door. The door leading out of the invisible walls that abuse builds. Rachel always said, "Mom, you were the foundation I stood on." But through this journey, I stood taller because of her, too. One early summer evening, Rachel walked into the living room with a manuscript nearly 200 pages thick. "What's this?" I asked. "My blog," she smiled, "but I think it needs to become something bigger." I smiled back, understanding immediately. "It'll be a book," I said. "Not just a book, Mom," Rachel said softly. "I want it to be a reminder for women who can't see a way out. I want them to know that the light doesn't disappear. Sometimes it's just hidden by someone else's shadow." I flipped through a few pages. There was Rachel's voice, gentle, patient, braver than ever. Suddenly I said, "I'm writing too." Rachel turned to me, wide-eyed. "What are you writing?" "A memoir, but not about law or victories. About motherhood. About the journey of learning not to lose myself while trying to protect someone else." She set her manuscript down and leaned her head on my shoulder. "Let's do it together?" I nodded, and in that moment I realized we had moved into a new chapter. No longer survivors running from pain, but women standing still, facing it, then shaping it into strength. One gentle Sunday morning, we decided to visit my husband's grave after nearly a year. The cemetery was quiet, lined with maple trees, unmoving in the still air. I brought white lilies, the kind he used to buy me on days that weren't special to anyone but him. Standing before the headstone, Rachel bent down to place the flowers, her hand trembling slightly. Her voice was small but clear. "I'm okay now, Dad." A breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. Sunlight filtered through the trees, falling across her face, making her look both strong and pure. I placed my hand on her back, my chest tightening. "He's proud of you," I whispered, "of both of us." We stood there a long time without speaking. In that silence, I felt my husband's warmth, as quiet, steady, and gentle as he had always been in our lives. On the drive home, Rachel turned to me, her eyes bright with a sudden understanding. "You know, if I hadn't gone through all of that, Maybe I wouldn't be who I am today, and I wouldn't be able to help those women. I took her hand. Suffering should never be the price for becoming strong, I said. But when it happens, how we rise, that's what defines us. Rachel smiled. I rose because of you. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, then answered through a tightening in my throat. No, Rachel, you rose because of yourself. I only lit the path. And for the first time in this long, winding journey, I realized both of us had found our new purpose, not to end a battle, but to begin a healing journey for others, a mission born from love, pain, and a light that even the deepest darkness could never extinguish. I spent nearly a year finishing the final draft of the memoir, a book I had first intended to write only for myself, but eventually realized it belonged to far more people than just me. It belonged to the women living in silence the way Rachel once did. It belonged to the mothers who had sat alone in the dark, breathless with worry because their daughters hadn't called. It belonged to those trapped in relationships where love had become nothing more than a mask for control and violence. The day I placed the last period on the manuscript, I reread the opening line, a sentence I had written with everything left in me after a long, exhausting but beautiful journey. If our story helps even one person, then all the pain was worth it. It wasn't poetic, it was the truth. A truth I had lived, witnessed, and chosen to believe in. Because in the midst of fear, in the cruelty of those who use power to harm, in the nights when I thought I would collapse, it was the understanding of strangers that kept us standing. Now I wanted to give that back to someone else. I dedicated the final chapter of the book to something I hadn't been able to say out loud for many years. That kind love is a right, not a gift. No one should have to endure, fear, or accept abuse in any form. No one should live under excuses like, I did it because I love you. And no mother should have to watch her child wither under a love that was never real. I wrote, you deserve kindness. You deserve a love that doesn't ask you to give up yourself just to survive. When Rachel read those lines, she didn't say a word. She simply walked over, wrapped her arms around me from behind, and rested her head on my shoulder for a long time. It was both a thank you and a reminder of how far we had come. Life after that was no longer loud, no more late-night phone calls, no more strange cars parked outside the gate, no more jolting awake at small noises. Rachel reclaimed her life, piece by piece, habit by habit, each morning with birdsong and a cup of coffee she made herself, each afternoon where she looked in the mirror and didn't see shame or fear. And I found the peace I had believed was lost forever. We kept our Sunday ritual, sitting in the garden, watching the sun sink behind the trees. In the early days, it was where we whispered about the pain. Now, it was where we revisited the past with a strange tenderness, not to forget, but to remember differently, softer, warmer, more grateful. I think I'm healed, Mom, Rachel said one evening as the wind carried the scent of lavender across the yard. I turned to her and smiled. You're not just healed, Rachel. You've bloomed. She laughed gently, her eyes shimmering as though they held the whole evening sky. The day my memoir was ready to send to the publisher, I sat before my computer and wrote the final note. Not a blessing, not a farewell, but a message for whoever would step into this story next, someone like you, listening to me recount this journey from beginning to end. I wrote, if you've read this far, where are you standing in your own story? What did this journey touch inside your heart? If you want to share, I'm here. I'm listening. Because I know there are stories that just need a place to be spoken so they no longer stay buried in the dark. I added, "Thank you, whoever you are, for spending the time to walk with me and my daughter through each page. Not everyone has the patience, and even fewer have the courage to stay through a story like this. And that is the truth. Not everyone dares to stay until the end of someone else's wounds." I closed the manuscript and inhaled deeply. I had written it, and now, instead of leaving those words only inside a book, I want to speak them to you, the person hearing me in this moment. Please share your thoughts below or your own story if you feel ready. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you can join me on more healing journeys. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. I looked up and saw Rachel standing at the doorway watching me with warm, loving eyes. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm proud of you." I smiled. My tears fell, not from pain or fear, but from knowing we had walked through a darkness so profound it once felt endless, and somehow we still made it here, to a place with light, with kindness, with peace. I close the story. I am Linda Harrington, a mother who saved her daughter, and a woman who found herself again. And if you're somewhere out there listening, remember that you too can find your light anytime, whenever you're ready. When my younger brother Grant came to visit from Denver, he froze in the middle of a house that used to be full of laughter. No chairs, no table, no photo of my husband on the wall. No familiar smell of food, just the cold hum of an empty refrigerator and the weak breathing of a mother who's lived 70 years. Grant turned back to me, eyes red. "Paula, you're living like this? With a $7,000 pension each month?" Before I could answer, Nolan, my son, stepped out from the other room, arms crossed, and said in a flat voice like he was stating a fact, "I give all of Mom's pension to my wife. She manages it better than Mom." The air in the house froze. Grant stood still for a few seconds, then slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, his eyes calm to the point of frightening. And what he did next would paralyze Nolan and turn this house into a crime scene of truth. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Paula Whitaker, 70, a widow, living in a small house in the suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri. This two-story place was where my husband Robert and I built our life, with a lavender garden he tended every morning. After Robert passed, I lived alone for more than 10 years, relying on a $7,000 monthly pension from my 42 years as head nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I never imagined that at this age, in the middle of America, I could be hungry. When Grant stepped through the door, I saw raw confusion in his eyes. He walked a circle around the living room, scanning as if searching for something familiar. The gray fabric sofa that used to sit under the window, the oak dining table Robert and I bought when we first married, the wedding photo in the hallway. All of it gone. He opened the fridge. Empty. Only an expired carton of milk, half a stick of butter, and a packet of instant noodles. The kitchen was dead cold. No coffee smell, no toaster sound, no sign of life in the house that had once been the warmest place I knew. Grant turned back, his voice rough. "Paula, where are you? Where's the sister I know? Tell me what's going on here." I could only press my lips together. Any excuse felt small under the gaze of the person who once called me the strongest big sister in the world. I didn't have the strength to explain. I just looked around the empty house and wondered, how did I let it come to this? Then Nolan appeared. My only son, now 38, walked out with a confident posture and a thin smile. Grant looked at him, waiting for an explanation. And Nolan said, in a tone so casual it was chilling, I give all of Mom's pension to Sloan. She manages it better than Mom. Mom just needs to rest and stay out of the money stuff." Grant blinked, stunned. He looked up at me, waiting for my reaction, but I just stood there too exhausted to argue. Nolan sat down, poured himself a glass of water, while I watched my thin hands start to shake. I knew Grant wanted to explode, but instead he slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. His eyes were dangerously calm, the kind of calm that means the truth is about to surface. "All right," he said quietly. "We're going to talk, but not the way you think." No one in that house understood that moment was the starting point for turning my entire life back over. Before Grant arrived, I had lived through 13 months of hell in my own home. After Nolan lost his job, he and his wife Sloan moved in for a few months to save on rent. I believed that. I still remember the day they moved in, Sloan smiling sweetly, saying, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll help with cooking and cleaning. We'll be like a big family." I believed her. I believed everything. But a few months quickly turned into, "We're staying." Soon, I was pushed out of my own master bedroom to make room for them. I moved into the smaller room, telling myself, that's what a mother should do. Then it started. Sloan suggested I hand my bank card to Nolan so he can feel useful. I hesitated, but seeing my son slumped on the couch, head down, shoulders shaking with the weight of unemployment, I couldn't say no. I handed over the card. And with it, I handed over my financial freedom. At first, things seemed fine. Bills were paid on time, the fridge was stocked. Nolan even gave me $100 and said, "Buy yourself something nice." But a few weeks later, the account password was changed, and I couldn't see the statements anymore. When I asked, Nolan laughed. "Don't worry, Mom, I manage it better. Seniors get scammed a lot, let me handle it." I wanted to believe, so I kept quiet. The food started to thin out. The things I liked disappeared. Chicken, salmon, fresh fruit. In their place were instant noodles, crackers, and what Sloan called a light dinner. Whenever I asked why, she said, "At your age, eating less is healthy and fresh stuff is expensive." I didn't realize I was being starved on purpose. The house was stripped bit by bit. The sofa where Robert read the paper, the oak table where we hosted Christmas, the wedding photo, the keepsakes from a lifetime of work, all gone to cover expenses. So I started keeping notes. I hid a small notebook in an old drawer where I wrote down dates, amounts, and what had disappeared. I also hid a backup phone just to photograph and record conversations when I knew something was wrong. I thought I was being cautious. Like Robert used to say, "No one protects you better than you, Paula." But honestly, I just wanted to believe that if anything happened, at least I'd have proof, and a thin hope that someone would notice I was being worn down. That someone turned out to be Grant. Grant has always been perceptive. After Robert passed, he called often, but for more than half a year I dodged his calls, always saying I was busy or fine. I was afraid that if he came, he'd see what I couldn't face, but he came anyway. And what he saw in this house, the emptiness, the cold, and my hollowed-out face told him it wasn't just a rough patch. I remember that moment like a photograph. The late-day light slanting through the window onto the bare floor, and Grant saying quietly, "Paula, this isn't a family issue anymore. This is a crime." He pulled out his phone and called the two people he trusted most, attorney Arthur Hale, Robert's old friend, and doctor. Camila Ortiz, a geriatric specialist he'd worked with in an elder care program. I didn't stop him. I just sat there, hands clasped, heart beating slow and heavy. From the moment Grant hung up, I knew my silent, compliant life was over. Today, every word and every invisible scar would be brought into the light. A knock came just minutes later. Grant turned to me, voice firm but gentle. "Sis, today is the day this ends. They turned you into a shadow, but I'm going to bring you back to yourself. I gripped the edge of the chair, looking around the empty house. For the first time in months, the air felt different. Not the cold smell of an empty fridge, but the scent of hope slipping back in. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and let out a long breath. "All right," I said, voice low but clear. "If the truth needs telling, I'll tell it. From the beginning. From the day I thought my love could fix everything." And so, in an empty house in Kansas City, my story began, the story of a mother who loved her son so much she lost herself, and the journey to reclaim her life from her own misplaced trust. I once believed that if I worked hard and lived decently, life would return fairness. Across 42 years as a nurse at Lakeview Community Hospital, I worked through countless night shifts, blaring sirens and hands that went cold in my arms. I was used to the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of gurney wheels on, tile, the white lights falling on faces, waiting to be saved. People used to ask me, "Paula, aren't you afraid of night shifts?" I smiled. I was afraid of the dark, but I was more afraid of not being there to help someone through it. I started at the hospital when I was 28, 2 years after marrying Harold. He was a civil engineer. I worked odd hours, often going in at dusk and coming home when the sun was up. Whenever I came home, he'd leave a warm pot of coffee and a note on the kitchen table. "Remember to eat breakfast. I left bread in the toaster." Our life was simple but full. Harold wasn't a talker, but his eyes were gentle, like every bit of my exhaustion was worth it. Then, one April morning, a light rain falling, I was handing off a shift when a call came from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the line shook. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm sorry. Your husband had a massive heart attack. We did everything we could." I collapsed in the hospital. The hallway, the place where I'd saved so many lives, but this time, the one who left was part of me. By the time I arrived, they said he'd only had time to say one last line to the attending doctor. "Tell my wife I'm proud of her. I've carried that sentence ever since." I don't remember how I got through the days that followed. The funeral passed quickly. Friends, co-workers, neighbors came to offer condolences, then left. I cleaned the house we used to laugh in and folded shirts that still smelled like his cologne. I thought that without Nolan, I might not have had a reason to get up in the morning. Nolan was 22 then, a senior majoring in business. He had Harold's calm and thoughtful eyes. I poured my love and my grief into him. Every time I went to work, I told myself, one more shift, one more week, so my son won't go without. I took more nights, cut every personal expense, hardly went out. No new dresses, no hair dye, no vacations for nearly 10 years. Everything so Nolan could graduate and go further than I ever could. I remember his graduation day clearly. I went straight from the hospital to the auditorium, still in my scrub top that smelled like rubbing alcohol. When Nolan stepped up to receive his diploma, he scanned the room and found me standing in the back, smiling with tired eyes. He held the diploma high and shouted, "Mom, I did it." The whole hall clapped. I smiled too, tears falling before I could wipe them. For the first time in years, my effort felt like it meant something. After that, Nolan quickly landed a job at a well-known logistics firm in the city. I was proud he was young, capable, full of promise. He started talking about the future, about getting married, buying a house. I nodded, both happy and anxious. I still remember the night he brought her home. "Sloane Parker, someone I met at a client conference," he said. "She's in marketing, smart and ambitious." Sloane reached out to shake my hand, voice soft but cool. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker." She was beautiful. Brown hair perfectly curled, a cream silk dress, expensive perfume. Her gaze made me feel both seen and judged. I kept a polite smile, poured tea, and tried to believe every modern woman carries a bit of pride. That night, while washing dishes, I asked Nolan, "Are you sure? She seems a little cold." He laughed. "Mom, she's just guarded." Sloane lost her parents early. She's been on her own since she was young. I think you'll like her. I didn't want to disappoint him. I figured maybe she just needed love. I'd read somewhere that people who act tough are often the most afraid of being hurt. So I opened my heart and welcomed Sloane like the daughter I never had. 6 months later, they married in a small but elegant ceremony at St. Andrews. I covered half the wedding cost the savings from nearly 20 years of extra shifts because I wanted Nolan to have a beautiful start. I remember the moment he held his bride's hand, eyes bright like the world had just opened wide. I stood in the church hallway watching them walk out under falling petals, feeling both happy and empty. The only man I ever loved now lay under cold earth, and my only son was starting his own life. After the ceremony, Sloane said to me, "I don't have parents anymore. Could you think of me as your daughter?" I nodded, moved. "Of course, Sloane. Your family." She smiled, but in that smile was a fleeting chill. The early months after the wedding were peaceful. Every Sunday, they came for dinner with pastries or wine. They talked about work, plans, and sometimes Sloane would say softly, "I hope we have a baby soon so you won't be lonely." Those words softened me. I started to picture a grandchild running through the lavender, laughter filling the gaps between me and my solitude. Time passed and everything seemed perfect. Nolan advanced. Sloane was praised at work. I was proud of them and kept my simple life. Until one December afternoon, Nolan showed up pale. I was prepping dinner when the door opened fast and he dropped into a chair, head in his hands. "What happened?" I asked, heart racing. He looked up, eyes red. "They cut staff, they're closing our branch. I lost my job, Mom." I stood still. My son, the one who promised he'd take care of me, was slumped in front of me like a lost boy. I put my hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, son. It's temporary. You're good at what you do." He shook his head. "I've got a car loan, apartment rent. Sloane's going to be so disappointed." I heard fear in his voice. Not fear of unemployment, fear of losing the image Sloane admired. That night, I didn't sleep. I made coffee and watched the city lights. The worry for my son rose in me like a tide. As a mother, nothing hurts more than seeing your child despair. I thought of my night shifts, of staying awake to save strangers, and told myself, if I could save them, I can save my own son. The next day, Nolan said they'd move in for a few months to save on rent. I agreed immediately, without hesitation. Deep down, a small warning flickered, the kind you get after seeing too many tragedies in a hospital, but I pushed it away. I saw one thing: my son needed me. And like always, I was ready to do anything to help him get back up. I didn't know that in that moment, that harmless nod, I opened the door to a nightmare that would last more than a year, where I'd lose money, memories, and finally, myself. Back then, I believed that if a mother just loved enough, the family would hold together. I didn't know some children don't need more love, they just want full control of what's in their mother's hands. And that was the beginning of everything. "Just a few months, Mom. Once I find a new job, Sloane and I will move out." When Nolan said it, it sounded light as air, and I sleepless for nights. Worrying about him nodded right away. I had no idea that from that moment on, my two-story home, the one holding my life and my memories with Harold, would stop being home in the way it used to be. I remember the morning they moved in. Nolan brought a few suitcases. Sloane drove a white luxury car with the trunk full of pricey luggage, high heels, handbags, and boxes of makeup. She beamed, sweet as honey. "Thank you, Mom. It feels so peaceful here, like a little vacation." I smiled, trying to believe my daughter-in-law was truly grateful. I took them upstairs to the room that used to be mine and Harold's. It still smelled like oak and old sunlight. I meant to keep it, but Nolan put a hand on my shoulder. "This room is bigger." You should stay downstairs for convenience. Sloan and I need space for work, and it's easier for me to take care of you." It sounded so reasonable I didn't argue. I packed up and moved to the small room on the first floor that used to be storage. That first night, Sloan cooked meatballs in tomato sauce, a recipe I learned from a friend's mom in Texas. She smiled brightly, wore a brand new apron, and told me to sit and relax. Watching her move around the kitchen warmed me. I imagined Harold smiling somewhere too. Dinner was lovely. We talked about Nolan applying to new companies, about starting over. I slept better than I had in months. But the peace didn't last. By the second week, I heard Sloane's complaints. "You buy this kind of toilet paper, Paula?" My skin reacts. Then, "The kitchen stuff is too old, let's replace everything. Gas stoves aren't safe." She stopped calling me Mom and switched to Paula. Every time I heard it, I felt pushed out of my own family. I tried to stay polite, cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, even as I got weaker. One day, I found Sloan opening my bedroom without knocking. She gave a little laugh. "Oh, I just needed scissors. Don't worry, think of me like a daughter." I forced a smile, but it pinched. That was the only room left that felt like it was mine. One evening, while I was mending an old sweater, Nolan came in. He looked exhausted, dark circles heavy under his eyes. "Mom," he hesitated, "I know you keep your pension in your account. If you let me manage it for now, you won't have to worry about bills, property tax, insurance. I can help you keep things organized so you can relax." I looked at my son, the one who cried in my arms at his father's funeral, and my heart softened. "Are you sure, Nolan?" "I don't want to be a burden." He smiled and held my hand. "Do you trust me? I just want you to rest. Let me be useful." So I agreed. The next morning, I handed him my bank card and quietly told him the PIN. I didn't realize I was handing over the last key to my freedom. The first week went fine. Bills were paid, the fridge was full, and Nolan gave me $100. "I know you like flowers. Go to the market, you need a little joy." I smiled. Maybe I'd worried too much. But by the third week, I couldn't access my bank account. When I asked, Nolan answered gently, "I changed the password, Mom. The bank requires two-factor now. I'll manage it. You don't need to worry." I hesitated, then nodded. I always thought trusting my son was the right thing. Meals started changing, no more roast or beef stew smells. Instead, instant noodles, crackers, and quick bites. Sloan said, "Too much fat isn't good for older folks. You should simplify your portions." I gave a thin smile, even as my stomach growled every night. One morning, I went to the market to buy fruit. When I swiped my card, the machine said insufficient funds. I froze. In my whole working life, I'd never heard those words. At home, I asked Nolan. He spoke quickly. "I pulled some out to pay off a credit card. Don't worry, I'll put it back soon." I stayed quiet. I didn't want to turn dinner into a fight. Meanwhile, Sloan started showing up with new things. Designer handbags, fresh dresses, red-soled heels I'd only seen in magazines. She said, "A friend gifted them, she works at an outlet." I knew outlets don't hand out gifts like that, but I said nothing. I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, things would get better. Nolan changed too. He dressed sharper, said he had interviews. When I asked where, he spoke vaguely. At night, I sat in my small room listening to their laughter upstairs, the pop of a wine cork, the TV. I told myself, my son is still happy. That's enough. Food kept shrinking, fruit disappeared, milk became rare. I got used to one small meal or splitting a packet of noodles to last the day. My body weakened, but I didn't speak up. I feared loneliness more than hunger. I was afraid if I complained, they'd leave and the house would be as empty as those first years after Harold died. Sometimes friends called to check in. I always said, "I'm fine, my son moved back in. It's wonderful." I heard my own voice shake, like I was telling someone else's story. One afternoon, I noticed the brass lamp Harold bought in 1985 was gone. When I asked, Sloan said casually, "I sold it. Old wiring, no one uses it. Got over $100 for it." I stayed silent. A few days later, the oak table was gone. Then the sofa set. Then our wedding frame. I looked around and saw only my fingernail marks left on the wall where that photo used to hang. That night, while they went out to dinner with friends, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty room. The yellow bulb spilled over, peeling paint, and in the fridge door's reflection I saw a thin old woman with frizzy hair, wearing a sweater with a worn neckline. I tried to remember the last time I heard myself laugh, maybe the first night they moved in. I sat there a long time. Then I opened the drawer and took out a small brown notebook where I began recording every detail: the date, the time, the amount of money, the item that disappeared. An old nurse's habit: write everything down in case you need to check later. I didn't think of it as evidence, just thought that if I started to forget someday, I'd still know what had happened. But the more I wrote, the more I realized the empty space in my life was widening, like a cut silently spreading. Every page was one lost item, one more piece of control taken, and one part of my dignity erased. That night, I wrote one line in red ink: June 12th, lost the wedding photo frame. Don't know if they sold it, but for sure I lost more than that. And I understood. Maybe everything really had started slipping out of my hands. I don't remember the exact day I began to suspect, only that one morning, when the sun just touched the window frame, I decided to withdraw a little cash to buy fruit and flowers for Harold's altar. It had been a long time I'd been living on whatever portions they gave me. I put on my old coat, went to the ATM near the supermarket, slid in my card, and entered the PIN. The screen lit up, then stopped at $37. I thought I read it wrong. I pulled out the card, wiped my glasses, and tried again. Same thing. $37 when I get a $7,000 pension each month, deposited automatically on the 10th. It was only the 16th. I stood frozen at the machine, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the keypad. Someone behind me urged me to hurry, so I bowed my head, pulled the card, and staggered outside. The midday sun was glaring, but I felt as cold as if I'd just walked out of a morgue. When I got home, Nolan was watching TV, feet up on the table, headphones on. I set my bag down and asked straight out, "Nolan, I just checked my account. There's $37 left. Explain." He didn't look at my dazeft. Plammy just pulled out an earbud and shrugged. "I pulled some out for a bit, Mom. Had to cover some debts. You wouldn't get it. Times are tough." I tried to stay calm. "How much did you take?" He turned, eyes sharpening. "Can you stop nitpicking? You live in this house and don't lack anything, and you still nag. You're selfish." I was speechless. Selfish. That word felt like a knife to the chest. Me, the one who raised him with calloused hands, who pulled triple shifts so he could pay tuition, now called selfish by my own son. The next day was my close friend Maggie's birthday, a former coworker from the hospital. For 30 years, we'd always exchanged small gifts, a bouquet, a book. I said, "Nolan, I want to take out a little money to buy Maggie a gift, just $20. He was holding his phone, didn't bother to look up. "No, I'm cycling that money." "You don't need to give gifts anymore. It's enough that they know you're broke." I went quiet. Not because I was broke, but because I knew there was nothing left to say. My meals shrank to the point of ridiculous. Half a packet of instant noodles split into 2 meals, a little boiled greens, sometimes a leftover cracker. I ate slowly, stretching each bite so I wouldn't feel like I was being starved. Once, I asked, "Sloan, why is there no fruit, milk, or meat lately?" She gave a small smile without looking up from her phone. "At your age, eating less is healthier." Too much protein tires the heart. I'm just thinking about you. I knew that was an excuse. Every night they ordered takeout pizza, lobster, pasta. I sat in my room and smelled the grease drift down the hallway, my stomach growling, my heart pounding. Once, I heard Sloane laugh loudly. Good thing she doesn't eat much. If she ate like us, we'd never have enough money. They both laughed. I lay still in the dark, tears soaking the pillow, not sure if it was from hunger or humiliation. My weight plummeted, 35 pounds lost in under half a year. I got dizzy whenever I stood up. I ran out of blood pressure meds and asked Nolan, "Can you buy my prescription for me? The old script is in the drawer." He said, "It's expensive. I'll order it online when there's a sale." 3 weeks passed, no meds. I started having trouble breathing. In the mornings, my heart raced, but I still tried to smile whenever they walked by. I didn't want them to see I was weak. Weak people get discarded. One afternoon, Maggie came to visit. She brought apple pie, my favorite. When she stepped in, I was so happy I almost cried. But before I could say anything, Sloane came down the stairs, a pasted-on smile. "Hi there, she's really tired. Please let her rest. She can't eat sweets." Maggie looked at me with worried eyes, but I only managed a small nod, pretending to agree. Sloane took the bag with the pie, gave one more smile, then saw my friend out. When the door closed, I heard the paper bag hit the trash can. That night I sat in my room, the light so dim my shadow stretched long across the wall. I realized they were isolating me on purpose. No one could see me. No one knew what was happening in this house. I was no longer the homeowner, no longer a mother, just a faint shape living on the pity of the very people draining me. I started keeping a journal. Each page had 3 columns: date, meal, amount. I logged it carefully like the old days as a nurse, tracking vitals and meds. April 14th. Ate half a packet of noodles. $0. April 15th. Ate crackers, water. $0. April 16th. Nolan withdrew more money, said property taxes. No documentation. My journal thickened day by day, like a treatment chart for a patient being treated with cruelty. I didn't know why I was writing, maybe to remember, maybe to prove I existed and how I was treated. Then one sleepless night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlight's yellow glow slip through the curtain. In my head, I heard Harold, what he told me before he died. "Paula, don't let anyone turn your kindness into a weapon." My hands shaking, I opened the drawer and took out the backup phone I'd hidden since the day Nolan moved in. I turned on the recorder. From that day, I started recording every conversation in the house. When Nolan told Sloane, "She's old, she won't remember anything." When Sloane said, "Let her eat less, we'll save a ton." When they talked about accounts, about selling a few antique pieces. I kept the phone in my coat pocket, pretending to tidy up, or sat and read. Their voices slipped into the mic, clear enough to chill me. Some nights I played it back, my chest aching like it was being squeezed. I didn't recognize my son's voice anymore. He used to say, "I love you more than anything." Now it was flat, calculating, indifferent. I began to change. No arguing, no asking, no crying. I just observed, wrote, and moved like a ghost in my own house. In the mornings, I still greeted them with a smile. At night, when they slept, I quietly checked old email statements I still had access to. The numbers drained away like water through fingers. More than $90,000 gone. I didn't know where it went, only saw charges for boutique, design project, renovation. I understood. This wasn't about Nolan struggling anymore. This was a deliberate plan. By month 13, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize myself. Wrinkled face, gray hair, sunken eyes, sallow skin. The woman in the mirror looked like a patient I'd once cared for, except I had no one caring for me. That night, I added to the journal. Month 13, $37 left. No one knows. No one asks. I'm not afraid anymore. I just want to live long enough to watch them fall. And I swore, with whatever strength I won, he had left, that I would not let Harold be ashamed of his wife. I would live. I would remember. And when the time came, I would make them pay for every packet of noodles I swallowed with tears. I don't know how Grant figured it out. Maybe the calls I kept dodging, the "I'm fine," I said too quickly, or just a brother's instinct built from growing up together. Either way, that morning when the door swung open, I saw Grant standing there in the doorway, eyes horrified as if he'd walked into something unbelievable. He didn't speak. He just stood there. Morning light poured across the threshold, lighting the room where my wedding photo with Harold used to hang, now just a bare wall pocked with nail marks. No chairs, no table, no sign of life. He walked in slowly, shoes tapping the cold wooden floor. I lay on a bare mattress, wrapped in a thin towel, shivering because the wind had slipped through the window gap the night before. Grant's eyes stopped on my gaunt body. Then he turned away, like he didn't want me to see his tears. "Paula," his voice broke, "you're living like this?" I tried to say I'm fine, but my throat locked. I wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Grant went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. 1 bottle of water, an empty butter tub, half an onion. He opened a cabinet, then turned to me, voice low and sharp as a knife. "You get a $7,000 pension each month, right?" I nodded. "Then where's the money?" Before I could answer, Nolan came downstairs, shirt unbuttoned, hair messy, face annoyed from being woken early. "What's going on?" Grant turned to face his nephew head on. "You want to know what's going on? I want to know why my sister is living like a homeless person in her own house." Nolan smirked, arms crossed. "Mom gives me all her pension. I just use it to invest so the whole family benefits. And those old things we sold them to clear space." He said it as calmly as well, if he were talking about the weather. Grant was quiet for a few seconds. Then he slowly took off his coat, folded it neatly, and set it on the empty table. His eyes were calm, but underneath was a banked fury waiting to blow. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "You just confessed, Nolan. And before we go any further, let me remind you everything you say is being remembered. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, it comes from someone who stands up and says, 'Enough.'" Did your chest tighten when Grant said that? Write your thoughts about that moment. I want to know if you felt the power of calm the way I did. Sloane came down the stairs in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand. She looked around, annoyed. "What's with all the noise? We have guests." Grant turned, a cold smile. "Oh, you must be Sloane. Good, this is convenient. I'm Grant Whitaker, Paula's brother. I'm here to take my sister's life back." I gave Grant a small nod. It was time. In my hand was the backup phone I'd hidden for over a year, holding all the recordings, photos of the things sold, and copies of bank statements. I set it on the table, light as placing a bomb. Grant looked at me, his eyes softening. "You did well." Nolan forced a laugh. "Mom recorded what?" "Come on, Mom. You're old. You think you're a detective?" Grant answered for me, his voice oddly calm. "No, but the police might be interested now." The air in the house thickened. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Grant pulled out his phone and dialed. "Arthur, I need you here now. Sloane and Nolan are both here. And bring a doctor, my sister's depleted." 20 minutes later, attorney Arthur Hale Harold's old friend and Dr. Camila Ortiz arrived. Arthur wore a gray suit, steady as ever. Camila had a stethoscope and quick professional eyes. Arthur looked around and sighed. "I never thought I'd be back here, like this." He turned to Nolan and Sloane. "We need all of Mrs. Whitaker's bank statements and transfer records for the past 12 months. Right now." Nolan reacted like he'd been struck. I'm not obligated to, Grant cut in, voice low and firm. Yes, you are. This is my mother's property. She's in a state of malnutrition and financial exploitation. If you don't cooperate, I'm calling the police. Sloane tried to look composed, but her lips trembled. You're slandering us. Paula gave money to her son. That's not a crime. Arthur set his briefcase on the table, opened it sheet by sheet. True, but exploiting an elder's assets through coercion and financial control is a federal offense, and I believe we have enough evidence here. Doctor. Camila knelt beside me, took my blood pressure, and asked quietly, "How have you been eating?" I gave a small smile. "Half a packet of noodles a day." She shook her head, jotted notes, then said softly to Arthur, "Stage 2 malnutrition. She needs to be admitted soon." Nolan started to unravel. "You don't understand. I was just trying to help my mom. I'll print the statements later." Grant stepped forward, facing my son head on. "No. Right now." Sloane set the cup down and stepped in front of her husband, voice rising. "You don't get to order people around in this house." Grant answered crisply, "This house is in Paula's name. And right now, she's been stripped of control by you two. I have every right to protect her." Arthur plugged the USB I'd handed him into his laptop. The screen filled with audio files, photos, and old statements. In one recording, Sloane's voice was crystal clear. "Let her eat less. She's old, eating more is just a waste of money." Then Nolan's voice, "Selling the stuff in the house is fine. She doesn't use it." The room went silent. Sloane went pale. Nolan lowered his head, lips pressed tight. Arthur stopped the audio and looked up, his voice calm, but cold. "I'll give you a chance to cooperate. Provide all bank statements, investment details, and a list of items sold. If not, I'll forward this file to the Kansas City police today." I looked at my son, the one who cried in my arms at his father's funeral, now just a stranger shrinking in a chair. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just a hollow ache. Sloane tried to salvage it. "We just wanted to invest in a store. It was going to help the whole family." Arthur said nothing, just held up a sheet. "These are purchase orders and credit card receipts in your name, drawn from Mrs. Whitaker's account. I count more than $90,000. You still want to call that investment?" No one answered. Grant hit record on his phone. "From now on, everything you say will be saved." I pulled out a small paper. I'd prepared the backup password to my old statement email. I set it on the table. "Here," I said, voice hoarse but clear. "If they delete anything, there's still a copy. I'm not as foolish as they think." Grant gave a small smile, not happy but relieved. He turned to me. "You did great, Paula. Now they know the helpless prey still has teeth." The room's energy shifted. Nolan and Sloane were no longer in control. Their eyes darted like cornered animals. Arthur gathered the files and said briefly, "The police will be in touch soon. First, Mrs. Whitaker needs to be taken to the hospital. I'll arrange it now." When they left, I looked around the empty room. Same four walls, but for the first time in 13 months, I felt my own breath return. I turned to Grant. He took my hand and squeezed. "Sis," he said, "you're not alone anymore." I nodded, eyes stinging. Outside, the Kansas sky was gray and the wind cut cold, but in my chest a light flickered back on. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I just felt calm, because I knew the nightmare had finally started to be stopped. Arthur had just collected the debt acknowledgement when he paused, eyes landing on a stack of papers Nolan had left half-tucked in a folder. "Let me see that." Nolan flinched. "That's just some broker flyers." Arthur opened it and flipped quickly through. Then he stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. "No, not flyers. This is a preliminary brokerage agreement from Greenfield Realty proposing to sell this house for $239,500. Plan to list officially in 3 weeks. The air around me felt heavy. A chill ran down my spine. Sell? The house? I blurted, almost in disbelief. But this is my house. I never signed anything. Arthur nodded slightly, his voice metallic. I know, and that's the problem. He pulled a few more sheets from the folder photocopies with a faint blue stamp. The signature here says Paula Whitaker, he pointed out the strokes, but it's nothing like your real signature. This is forgery. They weren't just taking your accounts, they planned to sell your property. Grant slammed his hand on the table, making Sloane's coffee cup shatter on the floor. God! My sister was about to be thrown out on the street? His voice shook with fury, somehow still cold and controlled. Nolan shot up. It's not like that. I just wanted to sell and buy a smaller place, it'd be easier. She doesn't need a big house. Grant spun around, eyes blazing. What did you just say? She doesn't need? Listen to yourself. You call that love? Arthur cut in, voice low and sharp as a blade. You've just admitted to attempting to sell an elder's property without legal authorization. In Missouri, that falls under elder financial abuse, and combined with forged signatures, this is forgery, a criminal offense. Nolan went pale. He looked to Sloane for help, but she had her head down, hands shaking. Arthur closed the folder and slid it, back toward them. Before I hand all of this to the Kansas prosecutors, I'm giving you one last chance. He looked straight at Nolan. You will sign a written admission of what you did. Agree to a repayment plan of $1,400 a month for 54 months, and leave this house within 2 hours. If not, this goes to the district attorney today. The room fell into a deadly silence. I heard wind whistling through the window seam, the clock ticking, and my own heart pounding. Nolan trembled, trying to take Sloane's hand, but she pulled away. I'm your family, he cried, voice cracking with desperation. Grant, who had stood still till then, turned slowly. His voice was deep and resonant, each word etched into the tile. Family doesn't starve each other. Family doesn't take the last dollar from the woman who gave them life to buy handbags and designer dresses. Nolan hung his head. For the first time I saw him cry not from deep remorse, but because he knew he'd lost it all. His reputation, his money, and his mother's trust. Sloane wiped her tears. We just wanted a chance. We thought we could restart. I didn't think it would get this bad. Arthur answered evenly. A chance is not stealing someone else's future, Mrs. Paula gave you a chance the day you stepped into this house and you tore it up yourself. I looked at them, feeling hollow. Memories flooded in. The warm wedding, Nolan's smile at graduation, the morning I baked bread the first time Sloane called me Mom. Now it was all dust. I spoke, quiet but clear. Your chance was built on my instant noodles, on nights I curled up listening to you laugh upstairs. If that's love, then I pray no one ever loves me like that again. Nolan broke down crying, fell to his knees, but Grant didn't budge. He pulled out a chair, set the paper on the table, and pushed a pen toward them. Right, now. Nolan's hand shook as he picked up the pen. Sloane bit her lip, tears falling onto the page and blurring the ink. Arthur checked his watch. You have exactly 2 hours to pack up. After that, the police will arrive. I don't want to see either of you within 10 miles of Mrs. Paula's house. No one answered. Grant turned to Arthur, speaking low. Make sure they don't have time to delete data or pull more money. Arthur nodded. I've already sent a temporary freeze request. All accounts connected to Sloane Boutique and Nolan Jenkins will be locked within 24 hours. Dr. Camila stood by, resting a hand on my shoulder. You need to go to the hospital now. I don't want your blood pressure over 160 for another minute. I nodded and slowly stood. My legs trembled, but they were steadier than ever before. Grant helped me into my coat, he murmured. You finished the hardest part. Now it's time to take back what's yours. I looked around the room one more time, bare. Walls, cold wood floors, a place that once held laughter now echoing with the sound of justice. Arthur gathered the files and sealed all the evidence. Statements, brokerage papers, forged POA, the audio files. He labeled it Evidence, Case Hash 27104. The rip of the tape sounded like sealing an old era, the era of trust betrayed. Sloane sank into a chair, face in her hands. Nolan stood frozen, as if all the strength had been drained from him. I said nothing more. Not because I had no words, but because my silence was the heaviest sentence I could deliver. Grant opened the door. Noon sunlight spilled in, golden across the floor. I turned back one last time, then stepped out. "Behind me," Arthur said firmly. "From now on, everything goes by the law." My steps were slow but no longer shaky. Each one sloughed off a bit of weight. I was no longer the woman forced to live in the dark, surviving on instant noodles. I was Paula Whitaker, who had passed through hunger and humiliation, and still stood up in the light. Grant's car was waiting at the curb. As I sat down, Dr. Camila wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my wrist one last time. "Still high, but more stable. Probably the adrenaline," she said, then smiled. "Or because you just won the first round." I looked out the window. Inside the house, two silhouettes were packing bags, faces drained. I felt no joy, no vindictive thrill, just the sense that it was time to end it. Grant started the engine and glanced over. "Let's go, hospital first, then my place. That house is getting locked up." I nodded. The car rolled forward, leaving behind the pale yellow house that had once been a home and then became a crime scene. And in the soft Kansas sunlight that day, I felt one thing clearly. You don't need to shout to win. You just need to stand up straight and stop being afraid. The nightmare was over, and justice, late as it was opening the door. I was admitted to the hospital that same afternoon. The internal medicine doors swung open, and the familiar smell of antiseptic rushed in the scent I'd lived with for over 40 years as a nurse, but now it made me feel strangely small. They put me in a bed, started an IV, checked my blood pressure, drew blood repeatedly. The drip ticked like a clock, slow and steady. I heard Dr. Camila tell the floor nurse, "BP 90/60, severe anemia, elevated BUN, she's on the edge of multi-organ failure. A few more weeks and we wouldn't have made it." I lay still, eyes on the white ceiling. Never in my life did I think I'd hear those words about me. Grant sat beside me, hands clasped tight. He didn't speak, just stood to straighten my blanket now and then, or patted my hand. Whenever I dreamed I was lost in an empty house with no exit, he squeezed my hand harder, pulling me back to the present. On day 3, I fully woke from a fever. Grant was still there, reading a novel he'd brought. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the corner of the table. He looked up when I opened my eyes. "Did you sleep?" I nodded slightly. My voice was weak, but my heart was lighter. It's the first time I slept without hearing them argue. Arthur visited on day 5. Same gray suit, briefcase full of papers. "Good news, Paula," he said as he pulled up a chair. "The court voided the forged POA and the bank approved the freeze. We're restoring the accounts." He opened a tablet and showed me a summary. "We can likely recover about $18,000 to $25,000 from remaining balances and liquidated assets from Sloane Boutique. The rest was basically burned up by the store." I didn't feel regret. I asked softly, "What about the insurance?" Arthur nodded. "We're reversing the beneficiary change. I've filed the formal request, and Nolan no longer has access to the records." Grant put a hand on my shoulder. "See, the tide's turning." I smiled faintly. Harold is probably exhaling somewhere. On day 6, Dr. Camila reviewed my labs. She shook her head, but this time with hope. "Numbers are improving, but Paula, you need at least 6 months of nutritional rehab. Your body's been depleted for a long time. I'll set a special diet and recommend therapy as well." I smiled lightly. "Doctor, I used to teach med students that emotional wounds take longer to heal than physical ones. I guess it's my turn to learn that lesson again." Grant laughed, trying to sound upbeat. "If you're philosophizing, you're doing okay." That afternoon, Arthur returned with another stack of papers. "Paula, I need your authorization to sell the Kansas house. Once everything is finalized, the funds will go into a private account with Grant temporarily supervising." I looked out the window, late sun filtering through the sheer curtain, lighting the small scar on my wrist, a relic from night shifts long ago. I nodded. "Sell it. I don't want to go back there. That house died with my trust." Grant hesitated. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I'll stay with you in Denver for a while. I need to learn how to live again before I think about being independent." He just nodded. No objections. Maybe because he knew that, for the first time in years, I was speaking with my own will. That evening, a nurse brought in an envelope. Someone left this at the front desk. "It's from Nolan Jenkins." I stared at the yellow envelope, the familiar handwriting. Grant moved to open it, but I raised a hand. "No. Leave it." "You don't want to know?" "I already know, Grant. That letter could be an apology, an excuse, or a plea, but every word is too late." I set the envelope aside and turned away. From that moment, I decided to revoke Nolan's visitation. I didn't want to see my son not to punish him, but to protect the small peace I'd just reclaimed. On day 8, the doctor let me sit up and start walking around the room. Grant supported me step by step, as gently as a brother helping his little sister learn to walk. When I got tired, he brewed herbal tea and read me cheerful bits of news from Denver: a new community garden, a free seniors yoga class, and the corner he planned to set up for me morning light just right for miniature rose pots. I teared up not for the flowers, but because for the first time someone spoke about my future home without strings attached. On day 9, when the last IV line came out, I felt like my body had been freed. Grant sat across from me, smiling. "Tomorrow you're discharged. Denver, here we come." I pressed my lips together and nodded. "But before we go, I want to do one thing." I took the small notebook from the drawer, the journal where I'd tracked every day, meal, and dollar for 13 months. I opened to the last page and wrote, "Day 274. Oatmeal for breakfast, not instant noodles, $0, but the feeling priceless." Grant smiled at me, and I broke down, truly cried, not from pain, but from release. I cried for the cold noodle dinners, the dry crackers that stuck in my throat, the fear that clenched me whenever I heard their footsteps in the hall. All of it was receding, like a shadow shrinking from the last bulb at the end of a tunnel. Dr. Camila came in as I wiped my tears and smiled softly. "Let it out, Paula. That's a good sign. If you can still cry, your heart still knows how to live." I squeezed her hand. "Doctor, you didn't just save my life. You helped me believe life can start over at 70. That night, after everyone left, I turned on the bedside lamp and wrote my new life plan. Health. Walk 20 minutes every morning. Eat 3 real meals. Finances. Open a private account. Share details only with Grant and Arthur. Legal safety. Draft a new will. Define beneficiaries clearly. And authorize the attorney to monitor any changes. I underlined the last line. No one gets to define my worth except me. When I finished, I looked out the window. Kansas streetlights still glowed, painting the sky a soft orange. Inside me, a new light was forming, small but steady. The next morning, Grant arrived early. He carefully packed my things and led me out. Before getting into the car, I glanced back at the hospital, a place I once thought I might never leave. I whispered to myself, this time, I'm not just leaving a hospital, I'm leaving the weaker version of me. As the car turned off the main road, I closed my eyes. I pictured a simple dinner in Denver, a small table, a plate of steamed vegetables, toast, and warm golden light. No shouting, no contempt, just peace. Thinking of that, I laughed through tears. I thought I'd lost everything, but now I knew I'd found the most important thing, the light at the end of the tunnel. I returned to the Kansas house, in mid-June, not to live, but to say goodbye. Grant had hired cleaners, painters, and a small furniture company to refresh the place before the sale. They worked hard, walls painted a creamy white, new window panes, polished wood floors. The house looked almost reborn. But crossing the threshold, I still felt a cold in my chest that no coat of paint could soften. Everything was tidy, but to me, it wasn't a home anymore. The air still held familiar traces, dish soap, oak, and a faint lavender I used to love. Now the scent tightened my throat. Each room echoed with the sounds of my old steps at night, the hollow fridge door, the clink of a spoon against a bowl of cold noodles. Grant said, "You don't have to go in. I'll handle everything." I shook my head. "No. If I don't close this door myself, it'll stay open in my mind." I walked through each room. The living room had a pale beige sofa now. The walls were clean, the lights were bright, but I could still see last year's shadow of me there, biting my lip to keep from crying when I heard Nolan arguing. The kitchen shone, the table gleamed, but I remembered every old knife mark where I sliced bread and where they laid out bills I never understood. Arthur arrived while I stood in the backyard. He carried his briefcase, that familiar, calm face. "Paula," he said, "everything is finalized. I've set up a trust to manage the sale proceeds and the monthly repayments from Nolan and Sloan. It will all transfer to you on schedule. No one can interfere." I nodded and thanked him. Grant stood quietly beside me, eyes following my movements. He understood. I wasn't just handing over a house, I was handing over a part of my life. I took exactly 3 things: an old photo frame of Harold, the man who told me, "Don't let anyone use family ties to push you out of your own home," a small box of Nolan's childhood keepsakes, his first roller coaster ticket, a green marble, and a note he once wrote, "I'll take care of you when you're old." And finally, a stack of thank you letters from patients I helped over 42 years, wobbly handwriting, short, but sincere. Those were the memories I chose to keep, the only ones that didn't hurt. When the door shut behind me, I stood on the stoop as a light breeze brushed my hair. A strange feeling slipped in, part sadness, part relief. Grant locked the door and handed the key to Arthur. "That's it," he said. I answered softly, "No, this is the beginning." 3 months later, I was living in Denver. The city had honey gold mornings, dry, clear air, and the smell of coffee on every corner. The little place Grant set up for me sat by a park lined with old elms. My room faced the garden. Every morning I opened the window to sparrows and air with no trace of debt. The Kansas house sold for $230,000, below market a bit, but enough to close the past. After an internal review, the bank refunded $22,000 from fraudulent transactions. Arthur sent monthly reports. Everything was transparent. As for Nolan and Sloan, they made the first 3 payments exactly on time, $1,400 each, full amount, no notes, no contact, and I didn't need anything more. I opened a new account at a different bank with 2-factor authentication. Every login required a code to my phone, the phone I bought myself, in my name, shared with no one. I called it a small symbol of freedom. Arthur helped update my will, everything clear. Grant as financial guardian if I lose capacity. The remainder to a support fund for retired nurses named the Harold and Paula Whitaker Fund. Every morning, I woke at 6 a.m., brewed mint tea, and looked out at the park. I walked around the small lake, met older neighbors, and exchanged gentle smiles. No one knew what I'd been through, and I didn't need them to. I just wanted to breathe, walk, and feel my heart grow. Calm again. I relearned to cook the foods I love, not for anyone else, but for me. On day 1, I made chicken vegetable soup with toasted bread. When the scent filled the small kitchen, I burst into tears, not from sadness, but from the feeling of caring for myself. That meal was my first lesson in self-care, something I'd forgotten for 70 years. Grant liked to joke, "You're becoming a new Mrs. Paula." I smiled. No, I'm just becoming who I used to be, the woman I lost in that family storm. At night before bed, I opened the little notebook now with new pages. I no longer tracked meal amount, but joy reason. September 1st, Joy walked with a neighbor named June. She told me about her flowers. September 2nd, Joy made tomato soup, and it wasn't too salty. September 3rd, Joy slept a full 7 hours. No dreams. I never thought slept 7 hours would make me proud. For 13 months of fear, I never slept deeply always. Half awake, flinching, afraid of doors opening, of strange footsteps. Now I could lie still, breathe in the clean pillowcase, hear the wind tap the window, and smile. One day Grant asked, "Do you ever miss Kansas?" I answered, "No, I only miss who I used to be there, not the place." He nodded and said nothing more. He understood. I kept Harold's photo on my desk. Each night I lit a small candle and told him about the day, not to memorialize, but to remind myself that people have truly loved me. Fall came early to Denver. Yellow leaves covered the porch. The wind carried the scent of coffee and apple pie from the shop across the street. I wrapped myself in the scarf Grant gave me, sat by the window, and watched the sun go down. In that moment, I realized I was living, not just surviving. No more shouting, no more contempt, no more fear of an empty fridge. Just me, a 70-year-old woman learning to love herself again, step by step. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Life, even broken, can keep going. I don't know how many years are ahead, but I know that from now on, not a single day will be taken by anyone or by fear. And when night fell, I whispered like a prayer, "Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Harold. And thank you, wounds. You taught me to stand up." Then I turned off the light. No more IV lines, no more darkness of hunger or guilt, just the first peaceful 7-hour sleep of my new life. I began therapy in early fall on Dr. Camila's advice. She said, "Your body's okay now, Paula. It's your soul's turn." The counseling center was in an old building with pale green walls and windows facing a small park. That first morning, I was a little shaky. I'd always thought therapy was for people who were weak or couldn't control their emotions. But when I met the therapist, Marissa, those thoughts faded. Marissa was around 50, voice light as a breeze, kind eyes that missed nothing. She let me tell the outline of what happened without interrupting, set a cup of herbal tea in front of me, then said something I'll never forget. "What you went through has a name, Paula. It's called financial abuse and coercive control." I went still, she continued, slowly, as if afraid I might not take it in. Financial abuse doesn't need physical force. It's when someone takes control of money, decides spending, or uses finances to make another person dependent. It's a form of abuse, and it leaves invisible wounds. I looked at my hands, these fingers that had cared for hundreds of patients now shaking because of a truth so simple it took me a year to hear. "So, I'm a victim?" Marissa nodded gently. "Yes. But more importantly, you're not in that role anymore." The first session ended with what seemed simple homework. "Write a letter to yourself at 70, Marissa said. "Write as if you're your own friend. Don't worry about grammar, just be honest." That night, at the small desk in my Denver room, I opened my old brown notebook, the one that had recorded hungry days and then small joys. I wrote, "Dear Paula, you are not at fault. You are not weak, not foolish, not to blame. You simply loved the wrong way, trusted the wrong person. That does not erase your worth. People can steal your money, but they can't take your dignity unless you let them. You're still alive, still able to smile, and that's already a win. When I closed the notebook, my hands had stopped shaking. Something rose inside me, self-forgiveness. Marissa encouraged me to rejoin community, to talk, to listen. I signed up for the church book club, where older women met every Wednesday to read and discuss. The first time, I sat in the corner, listening to laughter and the way they argued about characters. Slowly, I began to speak up. One day, when the group read The Color Purple, I shared a bit of my story. The room went quiet for a few seconds, then a silver-haired woman beside me said softly, "I was like you once. My husband kept all our bank cards for 20 years. I didn't think it was abuse until I read this book." We looked at each other. No more words were needed. Just understanding the kind you only recognize in someone who's lived it. From then on, I shared more. I talked about keeping a private account, locking cards, turning on two-factor authentication, reading monthly statements, and not hesitating to ask when something looks wrong. Marissa said, "Sharing experience is a powerful way to heal. When you help someone else out of the dark, that light also shines back on you." I didn't expect that from those small conversations. An idea would slowly take shape. I asked Grant and the church to help set up a small fund for victims of financial abuse, for older women who have no one left beside them. The fund would simply cover temporary housing, legal consultations, and classes to relearn personal money management. I called it Second Light. Because I know not everyone gets the chance to relight their life. My health steadily improved. I ate well, slept deeply, gained back about 22 pounds, my skin started to look healthy, and the hair loss stopped. Dr. Camila called for a check-in. When she heard me talk about Denver, she laughed. "You're getting younger, Paula. Keep this up, and I'll be jealous." I answered, "No, I'm just finally living at my real age, not the age of fear." Grant noticed too. One evening, when I burst out laughing at a comedy show, he looked over at me, half joking, half serious. "You're back." I've been waiting to hear that laugh for 2 years. I laughed even harder, tears in my eyes, but still smiling. "And you're still the first one to hear it." Now I can think of Nolan without struggling to breathe. The thought of him still pricks my heart, but it doesn't squeeze it anymore. I've learned this. Forgiveness isn't acceptance, it's taking the weight off your own shoulders. I still haven't read his letter, the yellow envelope lying in my desk drawer. Some nights I look at it for a long time, then set it down. Marissa said, "When you're ready, you'll know. Don't force yourself to reopen a wound that's just begun to close." I listened. I left it there as a reminder that we don't have to finish every story to move forward. In November, I was invited to speak at a small church workshop on preventing financial abuse. I stepped up to the lectern, hands a little shaky, but my voice steady. I used to think abuse only meant violence, but now I understand that sometimes abuse wears the face of love, of someone saying, "Mom, let me handle it," while quietly taking away your right to live. In the audience, a few women nodded, some wiped their tears. I continued, "Financial abuse starts with small things. When they say, 'Give me the card,' it's easier if I manage it. When they forbid you from checking statements because you wouldn't understand. When you ask to buy something and they say, 'What do you need money for?' All of those, added together, are how someone strips away your control." I ended with a smile. But I'm still here. I lost almost everything, and I got myself back. If I can do it at 70, anyone can. As I stepped down, a silver-haired woman took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You just named a pain I was afraid to name for 10 years. I simply squeezed her hand in return. No more words were needed. That night, back home, I sat in front of Harold's photo. A small candle flickered, its light trembling across the wall. I whispered, Do you see, love? I know how to name my wound now, and I know how to heal it. Then I smiled. Not the forced smile of survival, but a true smile, the smile of someone who has taken back her life. A year passed since I left Kansas. The first winter in Denver was cold, but gentle, the kind of clear cold that makes you want to brew tea and sit quietly listening to the snow outside the window. I kept my old habit, recording each expense and each small joy, as if that notebook were proof I was still living, still in control of my life. That morning, Arthur called. His voice was as calm as always, but I could hear warmth in it. "Paula, I have an update. It's been 12 months since the repayment plan began. As of today, Nolan has paid $16,800, 12 installments, each $1,400. I was silent for a few seconds, looking out the window. A thin layer of snow covered the yard. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or hollow. Finally, I asked quietly, "How much is left?" Arthur flipped through papers. I heard the rustle over the phone. "About $59,000. Under the agreement, if they miss more than 2 consecutive installments, I'll refer the case to the district attorney and trigger criminal charges. I'm holding all the evidence, so you don't need to worry." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, Arthur. I just want everything to follow the process, no more, no less." He hesitated, then continued. "One more thing. Nolan wants to send you a letter, along with notes from his therapist. I've reviewed it, nothing harmful, so I'm forwarding it for you to decide." I thanked him and asked him to mail it. When I hung up, my heart beat strangely fast. I thought I had no feelings left about that name, and still, something twinged. 3 days later, the brown envelope lay on the table. I left it there all morning. Only that evening, after a prayer service at church, did I pick it up. In a quiet room, candlelight shimmering on Harold's frame, I opened the letter with hands that no longer trembled. Nolan's voice appeared on the page, slow, halting, but honest. "Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm only asking you to read this. I've been seeing a therapist for 6 months. She helped me see I didn't just steal your money. I stole your trust, your peace, and the image of the mother I once loved most. I wasn't starving. I was afraid of failing, afraid of seeing my wife disappointed. When Sloan said, 'Investing will change our lives,' I saw the easy path, and I chose the easy and cruel path. Now I know there's nothing easy about carrying guilt. I'm working at a small construction company, 35 hours a week. Every time I send a payment, I feel a little lighter, but it also hurts because I miss you. I don't dare call. I just want you to know, I'm still trying to fix myself." I set the letter down and took a deep breath. No tears, no anger. Just a quiet feeling, as if a storm had passed, leaving a beach strewn with debris, but the wind had stopped. I reread the last paragraph several times. Not because I wanted to believe it, but because I realized this. I could read my son's letter and my hands did not shake. Arthur was right. When you regain control, the numbers speak for themselves. $16,800, each dollar proof that justice isn't an abstract idea, but a repeated action, on schedule, without emotion, without bargaining. I didn't reply right away. The next day, as light snow fell, I sat down and wrote a short letter, just 3 sentences. "Nolan, keep paying the debt. Heal. I'm praying you'll learn the worth of an honest dollar. No, love, no, I miss you." But I knew it was the gentlest, most appropriate answer I could give. At the end of the month, Arthur visited during a business trip to Denver. He brought new files, financial updates, and a small envelope. "We've locked every channel they could exploit, from linked accounts and insurance to old credit profiles. Everything is now in your name and protected with biometric authentication. No one can access anything without your fingerprint." I smiled. "Sounds like a spy movie." Arthur chuckled. "In this era, seniors deserve that level of protection. And honestly, it's rare to see someone as steady as you calm through the whole process. I answered softly. I just don't want to live in fear of someone else's signature ever again. Grant showed up after with a flyer. Look at this. The city library has a digital skills for seniors course, how to spot phishing emails, protect your info, and manage accounts online. I laughed. Are you calling me outdated? He smiled kindly. No, I want you modern enough that no one can trick you again. So I signed up. In week 1, I learned to recognize fake texts, check bank domains carefully, and report suspicious activity. In week 2, I learned to set strong passwords and store data safely. Each feature I understood made me feel a little stronger, as if the walls of a new fortress were going up solid, no more breaches. The instructor, a man in his 30s, said, "The best part is Mrs. Paula isn't afraid to ask questions. People are only weak when they're afraid to learn." I smiled. I was a nurse. If I could learn to stitch wounds, I can learn to protect my digital wallet. That night I went home, brewed chamomile tea, opened my account list on the computer, and looked at the clear, balanced numbers. No one else touching them, no mysterious transfers. Those numbers weren't just money, they were proof of freedom. Grant dropped by and saw me typing a password. He grinned. "You look professional," I said. "Don't forget, I used to run an ICU unit. Online accounts are just digital IV lines." We both laughed. That sound hadn't filled a room so naturally in a long time, unweighted by memories. After Grant left, I sat alone. Outside, snow fell quietly, streetlights reflecting on the window pane. I looked at Harold's photo and whispered, "See, love, I did it. I'm not just surviving, I'm living in peace." Inside me, no resentment, no why. Everything had returned to its place, my son learning how to be decent again, me learning to trust myself. When the clock struck 9 p.m., I closed the laptop, turned out the light, and headed to bed. No fear of being jolted awake at night, no haunting memory of $37, only stillness and safety, the kind I spent a lifetime finding again. I climbed into bed, pulled up the blanket, and smiled into the dark. For the first time, I understood deeply that justice is sometimes not punishment, but the quiet of no longer having to be on guard. I closed my eyes. Outside, the snow kept falling softly, as if the world itself were breathing lightly with me. And in that sleep, I knew, at last, I was truly at peace. Early morning, I made a cup of hot cocoa and stood by the window, looking at the Rocky Mountains blushing with dawn. The sun had just lifted over the far ridge, bathing the room in a gentle, warm light, like a hand resting on my shoulder. Outside, last night's snow was melting on the sill. I heard Grant's footsteps from the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air. He leaned on the doorway and asked softly, "What are you thinking, Paula?" I smiled, turning the cup so the steam drifted up evenly. "Wondering what freedom tastes like." "And now I know it tastes like toast with salted butter." Grant laughed. And I laughed too, not the kind of laugh you force to look strong, but a real, simple, weightless laugh. Freedom, it turns out, isn't something grand. It's being able to make your own cocoa in the morning, to spend your own money, to say no without fear of punishment. On the table, a small recorder was waiting. Today I decided to record the final chapter of my journey, not for the court, not for any legal file, but for people who might be quietly living in the dark the way I once did. I pressed record, and my voice came slow and clear. This is Paula Whitaker, 70 years old. A year ago, I lived on half a cup of instant noodles a day, in a house with no furniture. Today, I have a home, accounts in my own name, and I can breathe without fear. I used to think justice meant making someone pay, but justice is actually when you're no longer being taken from. I relearned how to live, how to trust, and most importantly, how to protect myself. I paused, took a deep breath, then continued. If you're listening and you see yourself in this story, know that you're not alone. There are laws, and there are people like me, like Grant, like Arthur, like therapists we understand, and we believe you. Don't stay silent. Don't be ashamed. Help is there, you only need to knock. I stopped the recording, played back a bit, then saved the file titled, From Instant Noodles to a New Start: The Journey of Paula Whitaker. I smiled, set the recorder down, and felt I had closed a long chapter, not with tears, but with a peaceful breath. At noon, Grant took me to the park nearby. The grass was still dewy. A few kids played with a golden retriever. Denver's air is always clear, as if this place was made for healing. Sitting on a wooden bench, I opened my little notebook and wrote down plans for the next year. I didn't want to run from the past anymore. I wanted to use it to help others. My plan had 3 parts. 1. Give talks at the senior center, sharing a personal financial protection checklist, how to manage PINs, statements, wills, and account access. 2. Join the Second Light Network, providing legal support for older women facing financial abuse. 3. Publish my audio journal not to complain, but to show that getting back up at 70 isn't unreasonable. Grant read it and nodded. Sounds like a recovery plan. I answered, half joking, half serious. No, it's a plan to keep living properly. In the afternoon, as sunlight poured through the curtains, I took Harold's photo from the shelf. In it, he still wore that gentle smile, the one that steadied me for decades. I touched the glass lightly and said, I saved myself, Harold. Maybe late, but in time. I believe if he were here, he'd be proud. I saved so many people as a nurse, but only now did I learn how to save myself. That evening, a letter from Nolan arrived. The envelope had the familiar handwriting, but this time I didn't hesitate. I opened it and read slowly. No choking, no trembling, just a calm, unlike before. My son wrote that work was steady, he was still paying on time, and he was about to volunteer with an organization that helps victims of financial abuse. I folded the letter and put it in a box. No tears, no anger. Because I know sometimes someone else's remorse isn't a gift for us, it's a reward they need to keep living. Late at night, I turned on the desk lamp and wrote a note for anyone who might find my story by chance. If someone is controlling your money, making you afraid to ask about your own account, if you have to ask permission to buy medicine or food, if you're called useless or told you don't understand the times, stop and remember, that isn't love. That is abuse, even when no fist is raised. But you have the right to live differently. You have the right to keep your own money. And there are people who will believe you and help you. I set down the pen, feeling my heart beat slow light as a dawn breath. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't an instant duty, it's a process. I don't have to force myself to love anyone just to look noble. I only have to stop letting resentment run my life. Outside, the sky turned a soft orange. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Last night's snow had mostly melted, leaving faint patches like memories. I took a deep breath. Denver's air is dry and cold, but not bitter. The sun slanted low, my shadow shortening the sign of a longer day. Grant came out with a slice of fresh toast. I took a bite. The butter melted, rich and warm. I looked at him and smiled. So this is what true freedom tastes like: ordinary, but so good it brings tears. He simply said, "You deserve it, Paula." I nodded, eyes lifting to the Rockies, where the last rays still stretched across the sky. And in that moment, I knew. My journey wasn't over, it was just changing direction, from survival to guiding those still being starved. I turned and walked back inside. Light spilled through the doorway, washing over every frame, every stack of books, every note I'd reclaimed from my old life. A new day was beginning, and I was finally living fully in my own sunrise. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of this journey. If you're still listening, maybe your heart carries a wound like mine, the wound of being belittled, used, or made to forget your own worth. I only want to say this: you're not alone. There are people like me, like Grant, like so many others who fell, stood back up, and found themselves again. Tell me where you're listening from, a small town or a windy city. Because maybe your story will be the rope that pulls someone else out of the dark. If this story touched you, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and share, not for me, but for those still suffering in silence who don't yet know there's a way out. I'm grateful for every heart that listened. And I promise, in every story to come, I'll keep telling so anyone who's been hurt can believe. Dignity doesn't fade with time. Justice is never too late. And light always finds its way back.